Big reels, sprockets, Saturday matinees, triple features at the drive-in. It's time for exploitation films. Good ones, bad ones, comedies, sex films, action, horror. You name it. Let's take a look back with Brian R. Solomon on the Outdated Entertainment Hour. Hello, cats and kittens. Welcome back to the Outdated Entertainment Hour. I am decrepit Bob Smith, your host. It happens. It's been kind of a stressful. No, I've just been busy. I've been busy with. As a lot of people know, I work in sports media, and I'm also doing 2 podcasts, and I'm trying to stay active on top of it physically. And sometimes it gets to you, and I'm feeling that right now. But I'm going to take a moment away from all that heavy stuff and talk about old time exploitation films from the 1960s through about the early 1990s. We're going to look back at the films that weren't distributed by the big time movie distributors that nonetheless made their mark one way or another. These aren't all great movies, but they're all kind of famous films. And our guest is a real media expert in the great Brian R. Solomon, the award-winning writer and journalist. So we got a lot in store for you. It's going to be a long show, but I think you'll find it interesting. And this one is just soaked in nostalgia. So if you want to relive some old time feelings, this is a show for you, particularly if you like movies of all kinds, from Saturday matinees to the earliest days of VHS tapes. That's what this show is all about. So hang on. We're going to have a little word from Joe Walsh here, and then we'll get right into it with exploitation films with Brian R. Solomon. Hey, where are you going? All right, if you want, that's a good snack. All right, can I get a piece of that? It looks good. No, really, I'm kind of famished. Could I?
Hi, everybody. This is Joe Walsh. One thing I do when I'm not playing rock and roll is get on the air as an amateur radio operator. Also called ham radio, is a communication service provided by ordinary people just like you and me. Ham radio operators are everywhere, in your city, your area, your neighborhood, in any country you go to. We have a national emergency communication system in place 24/7, 365. In case of natural or man-made disasters, earthquakes, tornadoes, hurricanes, floods, you name it, we're there. Find out more about amateur radio at arrl.org/whatishamradio. See you on the air.
I hear howling from the back. This is near Halloween as we record this particular episode of our bi-weekly Outdated Entertainment Hour. And I have one of my favorite media people with us today. It's Brian R. Solomon, the author of a couple of my favorite books. He's heavily involved in the world of professional wrestling. He's also an author and writer in every subject matter you can think of. Brian, welcome back, man. It's good to see you.
It's my pleasure to be here, Bob. Thanks for having me. And I just want to let you know, the howl that you heard at the beginning, that's my son. He's in the other room. There is construction going on in my office at the moment. So I find myself smack dab in the middle of my house as I'm recording here in the dining room. So there may be similar howlings from time to time. Just like
we're both recording from a brand new position. Where I'm speaking to you now is in, my place of employment. And it's a hovel with Ethernet. It's like a totally unused room that's about the size of a closet, and I'm hoping this sounds as good as it should. So we'll find out anyway.
Sounds great to me.
Podcasting is an inexact science. Would you agree with that?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. It's
Oh, by
very
the way,
slapdash.
I forgot to mention the talk about your wrestling podcast if you would, because it's one of the best and highest rated ones out there. And even if you're not a wrestling fan, I think people may get a kick out of it.
Sure, thank you. It's called Shut Up and Wrestle, and it's a vintage, so that's good for your listeners, but it's like a vintage wrestling podcast, old school wrestling, which has a vague definition. I just ask that it be older than 20 years. If it's older than 20 years, then we can talk about it. And I have rotating guests, so like yourself, and just whoever I have that week is going to be who dictates what the topic is, whatever their area of interest or expertise is. We go all over the place. I mean, I've had people talking about lucha libre and wrestling in Toronto and the South and Japan and Argentina. I mean, you name it, everywhere. And it's part of the Arcadian Vanguard Network. And you can get it wherever you find your podcast. Shut Up and Wrestle.
Mm-hmm. And I'm telling you, Brian is a first-rate podcast, and you're going to want to hear that. And any writing he does, anything he does. This is one of my current heroes in the media scene because you really are good at what you do, and I really enjoy your work. So I don't want to butter you up too much, but there you go.
Well, I appreciate it, Bob. And you're doing great too. I like to see how both shows are just kind of exploding, going everywhere. I see the wrestling one is on a platform network now. It's just great stuff.
Yeah, it's been an interesting experiment on my part. Sometimes I wonder, you know how it is with podcasting. You look around and you go, "Hey, I have no social life anymore." But it's if you do this stuff right, I find it takes a lot of time, and I don't mind if the end result product is good. And I think it's good. Here's the deal: I have guests coming to look for me, which is I didn't anticipate that with either podcast. I really didn't. So it's making life a little easier, and I just want to put out a good show and one that's different and outdated. Like I tell people these days, is really a goofy word for classic. That's what we're really talking about. Classic things that we all enjoyed, and giving thanks and looking back with fondness, with the possible exception of this show, because this show we're going to look at exploitation films. For me, it's from what I'm calling from drive-ins to home video. That whole period of cinema. My reference point is between the 70s and the VHS era. And because you know what? We're talking non-studio, don't know how they got distributed, oddball films that kind of either fall through the either kind of fall through the cracks or they become really big hits sometimes.
Yes. Yeah, that's true. And I mean, yeah, you definitely have to include the home video era because that was a whole avenue for these movies to get seen by the public, like especially as drive-ins were dying out and grindhouse theaters were dying out. Direct to video, people laugh at it, but that was like the place to go. I mean, especially I was a horror movie fan as a kid, and the things you would find at the video store, just to talk about blowing your mind. Like before we started, you were talking about the experience of going to the local kind of small time kind of movie theater that would show these kinds of movies. I didn't have that experience in Brooklyn. I didn't really have a theater like that. So for me, it was the video store. It was like going and looking at those boxes on the shelf, and you can't believe some of the things with the horror movies and things. How could you not be fascinated and want to rent all of it, And that's kind of, I think, where some of that started for me. And syndicated TV too. Like, I don't know, you had the experience. I had it when I was young, where in the city we had 3 syndicated channels. There was WNEW Channel 5, which became Fox. There was WOR Channel 9, the classic, which was almost like a superstation, I think, because it got beamed to other markets. And then there was WPIX 11, which is the last man standing. They're still around, but it's not the same anymore. But those syndicated channels would get a lot of these type of movies. They were, especially in the era before infomercials, right? Because I think infomercials killed all of this. Infomercials were like the Vince McMahon of syndicated TV because they came in and they paid. The reason I say that is they paid the TV channels, the TV networks, to carry their product, and so channels like the ones I mentioned, they no longer had to go, hey, we desperately need programming. Let's throw some of these old B movies and old TV shows and old cartoons. Let's just fill up the programming day. They didn't have to do that anymore because they had somebody saying, hey, we'll pay you if you put our Ginsu knife commercial on for a half hour. Yeah. And that was the end of a lot of that. But that's how I discovered Hammer horror movies. I was talking about them a few weeks ago. That's how I discovered Universal monster movies, Godzilla and other kind of kaiju Japanese movies and things, kung fu movies, spaghetti westerns. That it was thanks to syndicated TV.
Yes, and you know what? Channel 9, back when it really was Channel 9, a real local flavored New York City station, and
Yes.
Channel 5 back in its Metro Media days, remember it was a Metro
Yeah,
Media company?
because Metro Media, I mean, you're a radio guy. Metro Media owned WNEW
Mhm.
television. They also owned WNEW FM, which was the rock and roll station, and they owned WNEW AM, which was like the American popular standards, the Frank
Oh,
Sinatra
man.
stuff. That
Oh
was
my
the
god.
soundtrack of my childhood,
You know something? I lived in upstate New York, in Catskill, New York, way up in Greene County near Albany, and I am telling you, my grandparents used to live right next door, and they had one of those beautiful wood-encased, 4-foot-high radios, all wood, right? And they used to listen to WNEW all the time, and I loved the warm sound of that tube radio,
Yeah.
and I even enjoyed the what I'd call the folky music on it. It just sounded great. So I'm glad you brought that up because I have wonderful memories of WNEW AM. It sounded beautiful on that thing.
It was something else. I know this is a local thing, but I knew this for a long time because my grandfather he listened to that station religiously. I mean, every day of his life, literally every day of his life. It would be
Mhm.
on the car radio everywhere we went. And he actually had a little transistor radio that he would carry around with him and listen to WNEW AM wherever he went.
Wow.
So he had, William B. William doing the Make Believe Ballroom, Jonathan Schwartz, who only just retired a few years ago. A lot of these great shows, and it really that station. He told me this, and I thought he was making it up, but I looked it up, and it's true. That station invented the format of playing records as your main programming block, because before them, what everything used to be on the radio, if it was music, it would almost always be live music. They would be broadcasting from a ballroom somewhere, or they would have singers in the studio. They considered it a cheat to play music on record because they figure, well, everyone can buy these records, why are we going to play the records on the air? And WNEW AM, because they had no money and they had no clout, they started spinning records, and that became the standard for the whole industry to play records instead of having live musicians in the studio. But that station was like, I know this isn't our official topic, but that was everything to me growing up. And like you said, I mean, it was music from way before my time.
Oh, me too. But I loved
It
it.
was
I
such a
just
musical education, such an
Yeah.
education.
I mean, I was just a little boy, 5, 6, 7 years old, listening to that
Mm-hmm.
radio. And back then, you would sit down and listen to the radio and not do something else. I think
Right.
part of the problem with the American psyche these days and why we're all jittery is we're always multitasking. You're listening to music while you're looking at a tablet, or you're watching TV while you got buds in your ears or something. Everybody's doing 2 things at once, or working while you're listening to music.
I
I
agree,
think
and I
I
mean,
think I think we need to, if you'll excuse me, I think we need to close our eyes and just listen to music just to listen to music. I think that would make a lot of people feel better and be a little calmer. I really do.
I agree. And I mean, I'm guilty of it when it's something that's an audio only stimulation. Like if it's music or podcasts, I'll usually be doing other things. The thing that I don't understand it with is when people tell me they do it with movies or TV. I don't know if you do that. I just can't get it. It's like if I'm watching something, I can't be doing anything else. Otherwise, I can't follow what the hell's going on. And
Yeah, I'm pretty good at just watching.
half the time when people tell me about a movie they didn't like, or because they couldn't follow the plot or whatever, and I really am pretty positive it's because they weren't really paying attention to the
Mhm.
movie. And I think that's why, but people do that. And the whole thing with watching television while you're on your phone at the same time, like my brain explodes. Like for me, what I try to do is if I'm really watching something, my phone isn't even near me. Like I'll put it on the shelf or whatever with the ringer on if someone's trying to call me or text me. Or worst case scenario, if I do have it by me and I need to look something up or do something, there's this great technology we have in 2024. I pause the damn thing that I'm watching, and when I'm done with whatever I have to do on my phone, I go back to what I was watching. It's very revolutionary, Bob. I'm going to set a new standard here.
Yeah, yeah.
I just can't multitask. I think multitasking, and my wife says it's a cop out, but I think multitasking is the biggest fraud around, because I think what winds up happening is instead of focusing on what you're doing and doing it right or giving it your undivided attention, you just wind up half-assing everything you're trying to do all at the same time. And I think I think it's a sham, and I'll die on that hill. But
Okay, I'm kind of with you on that. I'm also a big proponent of staring at the wall 10 minutes a day too. I'm serious.
yeah, it's being
Mellow
alone with
out.
your thoughts.
Mellow out. Stop. You don't. We are constantly bombarded with sensory apparatus. Here comes this pounding your head.
Agreed.
Noise from here, noise from there. Get home, look at your wall for time. I do it every single day, or actually, I should say, I look at my ceiling. I kind of lay back on my bed, look at the ceiling. Just 10 minutes as soon as I get home, I feel a little calmer, and then I go and do other things. It's just, I think it's healthy.
I'll do that in my yard if the weather's nice. I'll go sit out there like my grandfather. I'll sit in the folding chair and I'll just look at the leaves on the trees for a little bit. That's how I do it. But
You know something. As I age, my parents used to sit. We had a house, and they had 2 folding chairs on the front porch, and they would just sit out there every evening. And my entire life would go, why would you want to do that? They're just looking at nothing. And now, as I'm aging, I'm like, I would love to sit in a lawn chair and just stare at nothing. Well,
See,
what? You see,
in the
they were right all
city,
along.
in the city, we had the stoop culture. That's what you did. You sat on your front stoop. And I used to do it. And now I think like, boy, I wish I could do that. The difference is if you do that here in Connecticut and you sit on your stoop, in the city, when you did that, people would be walking by your house and you'd say hello and you'd talk to them and this and that. Here, you could do that and maybe like a squirrel might go by every 10 minutes or whatever. There's nothing to do. My grandfather went nuts when they brought him out here, God rest his soul, because when my parents moved out here to follow me out here, they brought him. And to him, it was like torture. He would sit on the front step like he used to do. And he made that joke. He'd say, oh, the bird flew by. And then I saw a chipmunk for 3 seconds. And he would go, doesn't anybody live here? I see houses. Doesn't anyone live in any of these houses? The city people trying to get used to country living. But Bob, this isn't why you had me.
I know. But you know what? One more point about that, though. New York City stoops. I can't think of a stoop without thinking. I'm not a madam, I'm a concierge, but that's a whole nother ball of wax, right?
Producers, right?
Which, yes, which to me is the greatest scene in the history of cinema. I laugh hysterically every time. There's no reason for it to be in the movie other than to introduce a character.
I'm a concierge.
My husband used to be the concierge, but he's dead. Now I'm the concierge. You get it? It's just so New York, so perfect. Mel Brooks. You gotta love Mel. But is he like 98 now? Wow.
He's pushing close to it. Yeah, I just read his autobiography, which was really entertaining.
One of my heroes.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
But you know what I want to say, though, before I forget and lose my train of thought on this, because we're talking about when you're talking about exploitation movies, you're talking about a gigantic, genre of movies, because most movie genres it's really by subject matter, but exploitation could be so many different kinds of things, or B movies. And for me, I have to say specifically, because I know this is how the conversation between us started before any of this, is my obsession in recent years. And there's reasons for this, but I have gone down such a rabbit hole, and I don't even know if it's definitely exploitation, but I don't know if you'd call it B movies, because they're more like foreign movies. The thing that has sucked me in and will not let go is I am obsessed with Italian movies from this period, 60s, 70s, 80s, Italian exploitation / genre movies. It's like an obsession. My wife, again, my poor wife, she thinks I'm nuts. But so like Giallo, which are like murder mystery / slasher movies. They're kind of thriller, not really horror. Mystery movies, big one. Spaghetti westerns, obsessed. I could watch a million of them, and sometimes they all just blend in together, and I don't even care. It's just the vibe and the ambiance of the spaghetti western. And there's a specific type of Italian movie which they call poliziotteschi in Italian, which is like Italy's answer to Dirty Harry. No joke. When Dirty Harry came out in the United States, and some other movies like Death Wish and things like that, they started copying it in Italy and doing these but like really sleazy type of things. Like it made Dirty Harry look like Mr. Rogers. like just sleazy kind of underbelly of Italian society, and these cops that just, like Dirty Harry, that will just break the rules and do whatever to get their man. And it's very, dark, seedy stuff, but and all formulaic. I mean, spaghetti western's very formulaic, Giallo very formulaic, Poliziotteschi formulaic. They even would do James Bond knockoffs in Italy. For a little while, there was like a whole wave of James Bond knockoffs. And for whatever reason, I can't get enough of these movies. I have a video store, believe it or not, yes, that is within driving distance of my house. And it's actually known worldwide because well, first of all, there aren't many of them left, but there's a company called Vinegar Syndrome that puts out a lot of B movies, and they remaster a lot of these schlocky movies. And they have a handful of retail stores around the country, and one of them happens to be 10 minutes away from my house. So and this is another reason why I love physical media. I go there and I wind up just like blowing way more money than I ever would want to. And every time I go, I come back with more of these movies, and I just can't stop watching them.
Wow. So you
Yeah.
do have a favorite type of thing there. That's kind of
I
cool.
do. I mean, I like a lot more than that. Like I mentioned, Hammer and
Oh yeah. Oh,
there
Hammer.
are many more. But that right now in my life, the past few years, it's all been about these Italian movies.
All right, now, before we do get into the meat of all this, I want to tell you an exploitation movie story about New York City.
Yes.
One of my favorite directors put out a new film, and as it worked out, someone I knew was in it for about 2 seconds. It came to New York City, and I said, "I'll go see this." So I was working at PWI at the time, right? And I jump on the Long Island Railroad, come to Manhattan right after work because it was a 6 o'clock showing. I believe it was the Selwyn Theater at 42nd Street. Talk about an adventure. All right. I mean, I walk in, I go, "Oh, this isn't the nicest theater I've ever seen." I pay my money, $6, whatever it is, and I sit down. Oh my gosh. Okay. Is that a doggy?
Yes. This
Okay.
is my Boston Terrier, Betty. I'm sorry. She's
Perfect
very
size
excited.
for what I'm about to talk about.
Yeah.
So I'm sitting there and there's some trailers on, and I feel my pant legs moving and running back and forth in this dingy
Oh.
theater was a rat about the size of your pet.
No, that's disgusting.
Yes, it was, but that's 42nd Street. Now, this wasn't
Yes.
even, that was just the beginning. All right. So the film starts and I see that, my friends in the movie, he goes, "Over there." That was about was one little line in the movie. And I hear whomp. Well, what's that? It was from within the theater. Whomp. What? What am I? Whoa. And then I see a flash. Crackheads with sterno ovens
Oh my God.
were doing their crack pipes in the theater.
That's nice. That's
Yeah,
good for business.
Yeah, good for business. Yeah, nobody was stopping them, and they were having hot dogs, as I recall. They
But
had
you
hot
gotta,
dogs from the front. Yeah,
well, they say it's good to eat when you do
yeah,
that,
you
so you
really
don't get
should.
sick.
Yeah.
You need to have a base.
So I wondered, and also the screen in the Selwyn had kind of a crease in it. I mean, who knows what goes on in this theater after midnight? Because they used to show movies like from
Right.
morning through probably about 2-3 o'clock in the morning. So it was quite an experience, and I never wanted to do the Deuce again. People loved that area, not me.
See, the thing about it gets romanticized, obviously. And
Mhm.
speaking of the Deuce, did you see that HBO show they did? Boy, that was what a fantastic show. If you haven't seen it, they did a show called The Deuce, which was
Yeah,
about
yeah.
42nd Street in that era and all that kind of stuff. And it's a combination of the drug, the crime that was happening, but also how it intersected with the porn industry that was exploding and everything. But I had a weird, for me, I mean, people don't realize how crazy it was in New York City in
Oh
that
God.
era. I mean, the city was like an open sewer. I mean, there's no other way. It almost was like it really was like it had become a national embarrassment if you think about it.
No, it really was. And you know what? The only film that really depicted it like that, a major film, was The Taking of Pelham 123. That was New York, right?
Yes,
They
that is
nailed it.
the ultimate. You're right. The
Mhm.
ultimate New York movie from that era. And I like anything from the late 60s into the early-ish 80s, like Out of Towners is a good one for that. That's maybe like one of the first ones that really was showing people how bad the city was getting, even though that's a comedy. But there's Taxi Driver and even as late as Ghostbusters, you get like a little glimpse of what New York was like at the time. I think once you start getting into, I guess Giuliani's reign in New York is when things start to get clamped down on. But it got bad, and it was like you would be afraid to bring your kids there, your families and things. I remember going into the city as a little kid, and definitely feeling like I'm seeing things I should not be seeing. Like I was saying before, there would be, and this has nothing to do with movies, but there would be hookers that would, first of all, they were everywhere.
Yes, they were.
Hookers and pimps were everywhere. And if you're a kid, you don't really understand what this is, right? And they would wait like by the tunnel entrances, so that basically they would get picked up by guys that were going in the tunnel, and then those guys would, whatever they would need to have would occur while they were driving through the tunnel. They would drop them off on the other side of the tunnel, and then they would get picked up going back, and that would just happen all day long. But when they would take us down 42nd Street, and I remember it because maybe if we might see a Broadway show, or we might be going to Radio City or something, whatever reason we happen to be in the city, we would drive, and I would look out the window, and like I said, I would see those grindhouse theaters that everybody talks about. I never got to go in, but I would see them, and you would see, and I'm not even just talking about, X-rated stuff. I just mean like regular grindhouse theaters. We'd be either walking by or driving by, and you'd look and you'd go, oh my goodness, like what's going on in there? What kind of movies do they show?
Yeah, well, you know what? It was.
I never got to go in and see them.
There was a mix. I mean, there was hardcore pornography, and then there were the porno theaters. We won't even talk about what went on in there, but they also had the R-rated, grindy horror. Just the low grade films you couldn't see anywhere else in the city if they got booked at all. And that's what a lot of people liked about 42nd, if you were brave enough to brave it.
That's what I mean. Yeah, even that kind of stuff is what I mean too. Like I would have loved to be able to be, by the time I got old enough, because I started really going into the city on my own in college. And by that point, for me, you're talking 90s. So forget it. It was over with. The party was over.
Yes. Yeah.
That was when it was in the midst of turning into Disney World. Like it is now literally a Disney World when you go down there. So I never got a chance. If I had hit that right age, I would have been all over that. I would have been going to those grindhouse theaters all the time.
Yeah, I'm telling you, once was enough. I mean, once was definitely enough. The most unappetizing venue I've ever been in my life. I mean, it was everything you would picture in terms of cliche, but there it was. I mean, the uninterested ticket seller from just go down the list. The dirty popcorn area, just right down the list. Everything you would picture, it was.
See, the side of it that I got to see was that even in Brooklyn, where I was growing up, we didn't have, when I was a kid, we didn't have the multiplexes yet, like you have today, like the modern multiplexes. Those really started popping up in the 90s, maybe even that very end of the 80s. So what you had was they were taking these old palatial theaters, like the ones that started in the silent movie days and the vaudeville days. They were still standing, but they would take them and they would gut them and they would chop them up into multiple rooms, so they could sell more tickets and show more movies. But you'd go to these places and you could see clearly, like I'm in a movie theater, like let's say it's the 80s and I'm going there and I'm going, this place is 60, 70 years old easily. I remember one of them on the side of the wall. It still said, painted on the wall, vaudeville shows daily. Okay? Painted on the side. You could still see it. It was faded. But you'd go into some of these and there would be mosaic tile on the walls and chandeliers hanging from the ceiling, these winding staircases that would go up to the second floor, but they were falling apart. They were ancient, but you would still get you'd go in and there'd be seats ripped out, there would be roaches, bugs everywhere. I never remember rats, thank God, but definitely bugs crawling all over things. I mean, and the floor, remember the floor, like your shoes would come off your feet, sticking to the floor.
Oh, yeah.
Literally sometimes. Like
a given. That's a given, yeah.
They would stick to the floor. And I mean, these places were just dilapidated old movie theaters. I do remember that. And that is also something that is kind of gone. And maybe that's not so bad, but it's not gone now.
No. Sometimes the good old days Well, everybody should experience a little something.
That's
It's just
all we had. I mean, I
yeah, yeah.
remember when the first real like modern multiplex came into Brooklyn, and at least anywhere near where I lived, and it was in Sheepshead Bay, and they built it. Like I said, I want to say like maybe right at the end of the '80s or maybe the beginning of the '90s. It was like an event, man. People were coming far and wide because they were like, "You can't believe this place! Like it's clean, it doesn't smell, the floors are clean. There's no bugs, there's no vermin." There's no there's no crimes being committed anywhere. It's like an actual, above boards business. It was a big deal because we never knew anything like that.
Mhm.
The one thing was there was one called the Lowe's Oriental in Brooklyn on 86th Street. If you watch the movie The French Connection, when they do the car chase under the elevated train tracks, what I'm talking about. There's a
Yeah,
scene in
sure.
that's right by 86th Street, and they passed the Lowe's Oriental in that scene. And that theater was the most preserved of the old palatial theaters. And you'd go in, they took the balcony and they chopped it up, like I said, into multiple rooms. But when you went into the main room, it was still the original main room. And it was gigantic. The movie screen was seriously about 20 feet high, maybe like 40 feet wide. It was massive, maybe bigger than that. And the sound system, and you probably will remember this. This is what the sound system was. There was a bullhorn in the corner above the screen, like in the upper left-hand corner, a single bullhorn, and the sound would just come out of that horn, and that was it.
So they were pumping it through the bullhorn
Yeah, they
as
were just
as their
pumping it.
PA system.
Yeah, there was forget about surround sound. There was just a bullhorn, it built into the wall next to the screen, and that was it. And it was just like, but I mean, like easily could seat a couple of thousand people in there easily.
Astounding.
Yeah.
I never see that today.
No, never, never. And that lasted till like the mid 90s. It was still around. The last
Mhm.
movie I saw there, I'll never forget because it was very forgettable. It was the Jerky Boys movie.
Oh, yeah.
That was the last movie I saw at that beautiful old theater.
Old theaters. I remember being a kid and with the family and going down Northern Boulevard toward we're going to Shea Stadium from driving from upstate, and they had a theater somewhere near there called the Fair Theater, FAIR, and for 7 consecutive years, all that's Marquis said was 3 X-rated hits. That's all. Marquis never changed.
That's all you needed to know.
I guess so. Yeah.
We had a theater on Bath Beach in Brooklyn. It was called the Deluxe. And this was one of those classic ones where it used to be a legitimate theater.
Mhm.
And by the time I was a kid, it was not a legitimate theater anymore. It was the theater where you were not allowed to go. And there were a lot of those. There's one up here in Connecticut too, which got converted back again. But there's one in Bridgeport called the Bijou by me, which used to be, it was once a palace, turned into a porno theater, and now it's back to being a movie theater again.
Yeah. Yeah. That's
Full circle.
It just, there seems to be a psychological profile about that, about how the decades changed in terms of what people went and saw and how you had to sneak into one of those theaters with the raincoat and the whole 9 yards.
But it's weird how mainstream it got, though.
It got very mainstream.
In the 70s, you had celebrities going to see these movies, and
Well,
like
Deep Throat and all that, yeah.
Sinatra and Sammy Davis and Spiro Agnew went to see it. There was a whole big thing and lines around the corner. I remember, it was almost like a date movie. Movies like that. It really achieved a weird kind of mainstream acceptance that is
for about 15 minutes.
Yeah,
Because,
for like 2 years.
Once they thought they had the golden goose, they didn't know what to do with it, and everything was, pretty horrid after that. It's like there aren't very many great cinematic pornographic films.
Well, they realized they didn't have to bother with any of that, so they just gave up on it.
That's right, and they gave up on plot and everything else.
The movie Boogie Nights is the greatest document
Yes, it is.
of what happened.
Mhm.
It really is. It's almost like a documentary watching that movie.
It seems that way. Yeah.
Great movie.
But anyway, we're not going to talk about porn here, so it's fine, folks. We're not
Okay.
going to get into that stuff, but we are going to talk about. Well, I don't know how to put it. We'll go as far as R-rated fare, we'll call it, or
Sure.
just exploitation movie. That's what they are, drive-in films, that type of thing. Do you want to start? What's on your list of stuff that's memorable that you've seen?
Oh boy, let me see. Well, I mean, if we're talking about even in the categories that I mentioned before, there's a movie. I heard you guys talking about Dario Argento the
Mhm.
other day, and one of his, which is a movie that, I mean, everybody talks about Suspiria, and that's a big one. Suspiria is one of the most terrifying horror movies I think I've ever seen. But he had another one that he did before that, which really put him on the map and really brought the Giallo to America and made it a thing here. And it's called The Bird with the Crystal Plumage. You ever
Oh,
hear of that?
yeah. Sure I did. Mhm.
And that came out, I want to say like 72 or 3. But that movie was it. Let me put it this way: the idea of Giallo in Italy had started in the 60s, and it was a combination, like I said, of it was sort of like a slasher movie, except made with real style and skill, where also you were invited to speculate on who the killer was, which doesn't happen in slasher movies. So it had that mystery aspect to it, and it was almost dying out. And then Dario Argento made Bird with the Crystal Plumage, and it was almost like Hitchcock. It was like exploitation crossed with Hitchcock.
Mhm.
Is the best way I could describe it. Where to the point where I think Hitchcock actually even saw the movie and liked it. Where it really gets into like psychosis and depravity, and it's more than just a murder mystery. It really gets deep into the human mind, and that became a trademark of Giallo ever after that. So that's a big one. Bird with the Crystal Plumage. Also, I love zombie movies. I've always had a soft spot for zombie movies, and there's one that came out at the end of the 70s, which in the UK was called, I think in the UK they called it Zombie Holocaust, if I'm remembering right,
I think
or,
you got that
or
nailed it, yeah.
Zombie
Mhm.
Flesh Eaters. But here it was just called Zombie, and sometimes it's called Zombie
Oh,
2.
I was in the theater, I saw that film with my brother.
Okay.
Yes, yes.
It's the one where the famous movie poster had the zombie with all the worms in his eye
Right,
socket,
yeah.
and the movie tagline was "We are going to eat you," which is
Mhm.
about as direct as you could get. And I just adore that movie. It's grotesque and horrible and unforgivable and incredibly violent. And I just I love it because you know what it is? When it comes to ultra, here's my thing. When it comes to ultra violent movies, I enjoy it if it's separated from reality. You know what I mean? Like I can watch a zombie movie, but I can't watch something like, Terrifier, like one of the like the ones they talk about now. I just can't deal with it because it's too I don't know, it's just too close to home for me. The world is horrible enough. Don't you
Right.
find that? I
Yeah.
find the world, and I think the older you get, the horrors of the world and the torture, and I have kids, and things like that. You want movies to be an escape. And in a weird way, something like Zombie 2 for me is an escape because the premise is so ridiculous.
You're bringing up a good point here in that, as a kid, I liked the gory. We'd go to the Saturday matinees to see our local theater, the community had no idea what they were booking. We used to have 50-cent kiddie matinees, and they would book horror movies. But I think that the owner of the theater thought every horror movie was like Frankenstein and Dracula. No, these were these weird sadistic gore movies out of Italy and stuff like that. Weird independent, well, grindhouse type of movies,
Right.
but they were showing them to kids for 50 cents.
There's
And
a
I'm like,
famous
"Well, what are you
story.
booking? What are you booking?" It was
Right.
amazing.
Well, there's a famous story about that because obviously one of the seminal grindhouse or exploitation movies, like one of the ultimate B movies that really was ahead of his time, is Night of the Living Dead.
Right.
I mean, that's almost such a huge thing at this point. It's not even worth mentioning. It's sort of like a given. Yes, of course, Night of the Living Dead, but that movie was such a game changer because, like you said, before that era, there's a reason why they thought that because most horror movies were safe for anybody to watch, even
Right.
children. I
Right.
mean, in
Right.
fact, horror movies were known, especially monster movies, they were known for appealing to children.
Okay.
Like the whole monster kid phenomenon, all those movies of the 50s and 60s, like kids loved those movies. So it was sort of like an accepted thing. But then when horror movies started to change, and Night of the Living Dead was one of the first ones, and there's a famous story because I think Roger Ebert might have told this story. Maybe this was how he saw it or something. But there was a phenomenon in those days that parents would drop their kids off at the movies. It was almost like free babysitting. Drop
Mhm.
your kid. Unthinkable today, I guess. but you'd drop your kid off and you'd go grocery shopping or whatever you had to do, run some errands, come back, pick the kid up from the movie theater. And of course, they would do this with monster movies, and because monster movies were kids' movies. There's a famous story that this happened with Night of the Living Dead. And it was almost like a horror movie within a horror movie because you had a room full of children. Night of the Living Dead comes on, and the kids are freaking the hell out, legitimately. Like some of them are trying to get out of the theater, like a horror movie. Like they're screaming, they're running into the lobby. Because, like you said, the exhibitor did not realize this is not the kind of horror movie you're used to.
Yeah.
This is not a movie that kids should be anywhere near. And that was the beginning of that. I talked to my son. My son is 7, and he's starting to get into spooky stuff, and he likes Halloween, and he wants to see spooky movies and things. And I said to him flat out, I said, unless it's a movie that's strictly made for kids, like a kid's movie, if you're talking about a horror movie, I said to him, 1970 is your cutoff. I said, you tell daddy. I said, if it was made before the late 60s, it's okay for you to watch. If it's a horror movie made from the 70s on, you're not old enough to watch it yet,
Yeah. And you know what? I will make a short editorial comment here. Like I said, when I was a kid, I'd watch those kind of movies. But now the genre has devolved or evolved, depending on how you look at it, into the phenomenon known as torture porn, which to me is like deathmatch wrestling. There's no call for it. Yeah, I think the whole idea of, as entertainment, getting off on watching somebody getting garroted for 20 minutes is a little bit extreme for me. I don't like the genre at all. I'm not into it.
Yeah, I mean, when I was young, when I was a teenager, my 20s or whatever, as I think a lot of us do, mainly guys, I think this is a phenomenon. You want to push yourself. You want to see the most extreme things. You seek it out. Oh my God, this movie is, and again, your definition of that changes when you're young too. Like for me, George Romero's Dawn of the Dead. You want to talk about a grindhouse movie. That was
right. And in the beginning it was, yeah.
That was a game changer for me. I saw that movie. I was staying at a friend's house. All right, this is a funny story I'll tell if you don't mind. I had a friend of mine. I hope he doesn't hear this, but he was a good friend of mine in Brooklyn. He had this girl that he was seeing. This is just like a classic Brooklyn story. He had this girl that he was seeing, and I was just a total loser. I never had girlfriends back then. So I would just hang around with him and be the third wheel everywhere. So I found myself, he went over to her house and he brought me with her. I probably should have been able to read social cues better, but I wasn't. So, they were off doing whatever. And I'm like, all right, I guess I'm going to just go hang out in the living room here. And this girl's father had a whole collection of horror movies on VHS. And one of them was Dawn of the Dead. And I popped it in. I never seen it before. I'm a teenager. And I'm watching this movie all by myself in the dark while my friend and his girlfriend are upstairs. And I am absolutely terrified to my core by this movie. I wind up, I'm not a little kid here. I'm like 15. I'm getting nightmares from the movie, recurring nightmares. Meanwhile, I watch it now and I laugh at it almost like it's a comedy. But at the time, it really got under my skin. And there are movies like that. And then I would start seeking out more things like, I want to see the Texas Chainsaw Massacre. Show me this. And Zombie 2 was one of those, just looking at the box cover. Or even something like I Spit on Your Grave. You want to talk about a exploitation.
Oh, gosh. Yeah, that was on my list.
That movie's just, you feel like you want to take a shower after you watch that movie.
It works in the way it was intended to work, but I can't say I was happy I saw it.
Because the interesting thing about movies like that, and this is a whole other thing, is I have a great fondness for revenge movies. And I don't know if it just says something about my personality. I love a movie where somebody who is wronged just takes a horrible, horrible vengeance upon the people who did it to them.
Mm-hmm.
I just get some type of a cathartic thrill out of watching these kind of movies. And it's not an exploitation movie at all, but that's why something like Braveheart, I love that movie. Because you watch Braveheart, and it's like the first 15, 20 minutes of the movie, it's Mel Gibson's character, William Wallace, just getting horribly abused and mistreated and everything taken away from him. And then he spends the next 2 hours just exacting a horrible, bloody vengeance on all these people. And I can't get enough of stuff like that. But I Spit on Your Grave, that's what drew me to that movie, where for people that don't know, it's really, the subject matter is just so vile, but it's a movie about a woman who's gang raped, and she basically goes insane because of the experience. She goes off the deep end and just really plots this revenge on all the people that did it to her, with different ways she's going to kill them and torture them, one after another. One of them is mentally challenged on top of everything else. And the rest of the movie is just concerned with that. And it's one of those movies where you come away from it just feeling like nobody won. There's no good guys in this movie. It's just a person was dehumanized and then embraced their dehumanization and then dehumanized other people. That's basically the message of the movie. And I remember I watched it. I don't know what possessed me to do this, but I had seen it before. But I sat down and I watched it with my wife and my sister. Why you would do this, I don't know. When it ended, you know what it was? There was a pay-per-view service. Don't ask me why they were doing it. It was Halloween, around Halloween time, and there was a pay-per-view cable service that was showing old horror movies. And this was one of the movies they decided would be great to watch around Halloween. I Spit on Your Grave. So we all watched it. And at the end of it, I really think my sister was just disgusted with me as a human being. She was looking at me like, why did you make us watch this? Number one. Why do you want to watch this? Number two. And I had to sit there and go, I don't really know the answer to that, but I have to think about that. But then, see, I was young. As I got older, I started to get way more sensitive to those things. It never used to bother me. I had a friend, you talk about torture porn. I had a friend that I worked with, and this was actually at the time I worked at WWE. I had a friend I worked with who he goes, "Oh, I hear you like horror movies. Oh, I got a good one for you." He lends me Hostel. Hostel. You
Oh
ever see
gosh.
Hostel?
Yeah, Hostel 2 I have a problem with on a personal level, but that's a whole different ball of wax because IFC showed it uncut at
I heard you
11
talking about this.
11
Yeah.
o'clock in the morning on a Saturday, and I'm picturing kids looking for cartoons, and they run into that thing.
But he gave it to me. Because, oh yeah, you like horror movies, and I'm like, yeah, I like Vincent Price. What are you giving me? So I come home, I watch the movie, and first of all, I couldn't even finish it. And then I went in and I was like pissed off at the guy. I really was. It was like a full circle moment. I was like, what kind of a person do you think I am? Like I said, you barely even know me. I've only known you a few months. What would make you think I want to see this? And he's like, oh, come on, it's not that bad. And I'm going, look, if this isn't that bad, what is that bad? Could you please tell me?
Exactly.
Because this is the most heinous thing I've ever seen. See, that's what I can't get with that. I feel like for me,
I can't do it.
and that goes with exploitation movies too, especially now. There has to be an element of some type of fun to it.
Yeah.
Even if it's a twisted kind of fun. Like even if it's like Dr. Phibes kind of fun. That's one of my most favorite movies of all time, The Abominable Dr. Phibes.
That's a great pick. Yeah.
Where it has like a twisted sense of humor to it.
Yeah, and it may be violent, but not too violent. It just straddles that tightrope, it's right there dancing on it.
Right. So Vincent Price, I think you might have mentioned this on the horror movie one, but he did Abominable Dr. Phibes, and then right after that he did Theater of Blood. And they both have this theme of revenge killing to them. And especially Theater of Blood, but really both of them, they're actually among the most violent movies that Vincent Price ever made. I mean, especially by his standards. There's a scene in Theater of Blood where a guy gets impaled on a spear, and you see the whole thing. They do the trick with the spear coming through the chest and everything. And there's a scene in Dr. Phibes. Is it Phibes? Or maybe it's Theater of Blood as well, where he decapitates the guy while he's sleeping. Like in a very kind of surgical way where, for Price, this is pretty violent stuff. But again, it's couched in to me, a more acceptable way because it's so outlandish and ridiculous that how could you not enjoy it, and have fun with it in a morbid kind of way. But it's like when movies that hit far too close to home. Sometimes I just can't get with it. There's no fun to be had. Here's one for you. Cannibal Holocaust. Talk about an exploitation movie.
You
Now,
saw that? You saw that thing?
I watched it one time. I will never watch it again. I watched it on a dare. And I can't even begin to describe it for people that don't know the gist of the movie. I mean, it's part of a whole genre, unfortunately, of cannibal movies, which I can't get into, which were exploitative in the extreme in a very real sense. Like they were exploiting native populations. They were actually using them in the movie and portraying them as, violent savages and making them do these horrible things, dramatized things. But, in some of these movies, animals are actually really tortured and killed, which is unforgivable. And so in this, the kind of standard bearer of the genre is Cannibal Holocaust. And this movie, it's the kind of movie you come away from it and you're angry at the people who made it. I don't know how familiar you are with the movie. Like I derive no enjoyment whatsoever from this movie. And I came away from it going like, these people belong in prison for making this movie.
Oh, you ever hear of a movie called A Serbian Film?
Heard of it, never seen it.
No, I wouldn't get near it because I read about it. It's
strictly based on reading the synopsis. I will not watch this.
No, I cannot. I can't. It for 1,000 different reasons. I wouldn't get near a movie like that.
That happens to me a lot. People, like I said, with the Hostel thing, people would be like, "Oh, you like scary movies? You like horror movies? And they'll make these recommendations to me, and I'll be like, I'm not watching that.
Yeah, I read about that one, and I was like, why? Just why? That I'll leave it at that. That's all I'll say about A Serbian Film. Now I'm gonna take over for a second because I'm eager to introduce somebody to you that you might not know.
Okay.
There was a gentleman who, from I'd say about 1960 to about 88, an Emmy Award-winning sports guy. His name was Andy Sedaris. Okay. He worked for ABC Sports and he directed AFL football games, right? And then he directed the first telecast of Wide World of Sports in 1961. He directed Monday Night Football games, and he did ABC's coverage of every Olympics that they did from the 1964 to 1988, right? And he won a bunch of Emmy Awards. But there was something different about Andy, okay? Now, all this football, all these sports. Now, while directing college football games at ABC, he pioneered what became known as the money shot. In other words, in between plays, close-ups of the cheerleaders. Right? Right? Or attractive female fans in the stands, that type of thing.
Right.
And which I don't know why he ended this award-winning national career, but starting in 1973, he started to make his own action films. And each of these films had, well, just to be blunt about them, every one of them had a bevy of Playboy Playmates and Penthouse Pets. But he developed the formula starting in 1979. One of my favorite movies, not exploitation movies, is called Seven. No, it's not the Brad Pitt Seven.
Okay.
It starred William Smith as the government in Hawaii is having a fit because there's all this organized crime, murdering people and just running rampant throughout the Hawaiian Islands. So they look up Drew was his name, played by William Smith, who's a famous action film star. He was in a couple of Clint Eastwood movies too.
Right.
So they assemble this unbelievably handsome crew of 7 people to go after 7 bad guys, really bad guys. And they spend the early part of the film showing how awful these bad guys are, like extortionists and murderers and political killers and all this other stuff. And the second half of the film is simply our good guy team going after the bad guys and offing them in the most satisfying ways you will ever see.
Right.
And on top of it, the entire cast, and in every one of these movies, this is the case, they're impossibly good looking. The women are absolutely stunning. The men are hunky and built, and for some reason, because of the cinematography, there's funny jokes. These movies work. Seven is one of my favorite movies because you don't expect it to be a good movie. I saw it on Showtime in 1980 originally, and I went, I love this movie. So I taped it the next time it was on, and I've gone on to get every Andy Sedaris. He went on to make 13 more action films, all featuring. And what I like about him is they were sexy, but they weren't sexist. They treated the female characters as equals to the men detectives and the men. They were all law enforcement, and they were all equals. They just happened to be in a nude in a hot tub for 15 seconds or so, or sunbathing in between, going after the bad guys. And you know what? Most of them were Sedaris and his wife lived in Hawaii. Most of them were filmed in Hawaii. So there's a lot of beautiful aerial photography. They don't look cheap, these movies.
Hmm.
And they were. They don't look cheap because he's a veteran cinematographer, veteran sports producer. I wholeheartedly recommend the Andy Sedaris. Some of the other titles are Malibu Express, Hard Ticket to Hawaii, Picasso Trigger, Savage Beach. Guns is a favorite. And his films got so popular in the B level of films. You got people like Danny Trio and Eric Estrada to be in these movies, and uh, Phyllis Davis and Sybil Danning and Art Matrano, the comedian, and Ron Moss, who's a soap opera star. Once in a while, you'd have somebody you actually heard of have a role in these movies. They really weren't bad. They're shockingly entertaining, and most of them you can watch right now on Tubi and Plex for free on a streaming service. I'm a huge fan of Andy Sedaris. People, I know what some people can say, Bob, you only do it because you think the girls are pretty. Yeah, but no, the movies are shockingly entertaining, and they're violent, but they don't cross that line. There's a lot of thrilling action, a lot of car chases. For what he did to put them together, tremendous movies. And I will say this: I got to actually speak with his wife. He died several years ago, and I got to speak with his wife when I was writing for Good Times Magazine. I did a column on these films, and because they were reviving them in a DVD set or something like that. So I got to talk to her, and she was really proud of what they had done together. And all the girls loved him, and all the actors thought he was great, and they all got paid, and all the checks cleared. So what can I say? And they all got to go to Hawaii.
Wow.
You
That's
know,
amazing.
so Andy
Not
Sedaris.
familiar with him. Wow.
No,
I'm not familiar with this
he
at
made he
all.
made
This is
four.
something new.
He made 14 films. I
Hmm.
saw two of them in theaters. One that I talked about, another one in another New York City cinema, and they must have made money. You can't make 14 movies if they lose money.
No, someone had to be bankrolling it and making money off of it.
But he had his own film company called Malibu Bay Films. One of his films was called Malibu Express. So I don't know what to say other than it's a guilty pleasure of mine, and I recommend it to our audience because they're kind of unlike anything else I've seen, and they're all over the freebie stations. The
Right.
free streaming. Which are, by the way, don't you love those things?
Yes.
They're awesome.
Oh, yeah.
Tubi and Plex have wonderful stuff on them. It's
I
amazing.
love finding streaming apps that are really off the beaten path, and it's amazing what you could find, especially for this type of stuff for exploitation. There's a great channel, I say channel, whatever you want to call it, streaming platform that I highly recommend to people. I'm serious. It's called Midnight Pulp.
Yep, I know all about it. Yeah.
All right. Midnight Pulp is a gold mine. Midnight Pulp might be the streaming platform I use more than any other. Definitely more than Netflix. I mean, Midnight Pulp is like my Netflix. They're fantastic. And they have a free level and a premium level. And I think the difference is commercials. If you don't want commercial interruptions, you can get the premium subscription, or I think there might even be more you can watch if you have the premium. But you can discover so many things on that one. There's other ones too. There's one called Ray Gun, which is interesting, but the quality of the video is very poor.
Mhm.
It's very poor kind of, whereas on Midnight Pulp, it's all very much HD, crystal clear, beautiful
Oh, nice.
images.
Okay.
If you
Yeah.
care about that, it looks very, very good. But a couple I want to mention too, because I discovered these through Midnight Pulp and through the video placed by me called The Archive. But there are a pair of movies, of exploitation movies, not horror, but it's just pure exploitation. There's this guy named Duke Mitchell. Hard to describe him if you've ever heard of him. He was sort of like a dime store Dean Martin is the best way to describe. No, he really was. He was like
Yeah. I just like the moniker. That's funny.
he was an also ran kind of lounge singer, B-movie actor of the 50s and 60s. And in the 70s, he kind of went off the rails and started doing these insane movies. he had a lot of connections in showbiz because, like I said, he was sort of like an also ran. He knew people. He was one of these guys like he knew Sinatra. He knew Jerry Lewis. He knew these people, but he wasn't that big of a deal himself. And he was inspired apparently by The Godfather. He was Italian American to the extreme, this guy. And he saw The Godfather and started thinking, hey, I could probably make a movie like that. Now, he could not, but it didn't stop him from trying to make his own version. He made a movie which was released. He called it something else, but in order to capitalize on the exploitation grindhouse market, they named it Massacre Mafia Style. It is one of the most insane movies you'll ever see because it's like, I know it's been mentioned as an inspiration for Tarantino, and I think it even inspired, in a weird way, Scorsese with Goodfellas, believe it or not. I can't even describe it. It's like,
I have seen the trailer for this. I haven't seen the film, but I've seen that trailer. You're right. It's mind-boggling.
It is incredibly violent in the sense of like not horror movie violent, but like action movie violent.
Right.
People, I don't think there's ever been a movie where more people got shot than this movie. But it's like a mafia movie, very Italian, like The Godfather. There's a lot of Italian spoken in the movie, a lot of Italian food, a lot of that, but it's just so bloody. And even there's a scene in this movie which I'll bet my life savings inspired the scene in Goodfellas, where a guy gets found on a meat hook in a frozen meat locker. Just like in Goodfellas, like what happened to Frankie Carbone. I think that was the character in Goodfellas. Except in this movie, it's way more violent. Like the hook is like protruding out of his eyeball and everything. But it's like if they made a mafia movie with a total grindhouse sensibility, that's what this is. The acting is horrendously bad. It doesn't matter. Mm-hmm. Then he did a follow-up movie, which never got finished in his lifetime. It never got released. It was discovered because Sylvester Stallone's son, who's gone now, but his son, Sage Stallone, he had it still exists, a distribution DVD company called Grindhouse Films. And they would release movies like this, that they would find these hidden gems and remaster them, release them. They found whatever existed of the prints of this movie, and they put it together and released it. It's called Gone with the Pope. Okay, so here's the Gone with the Pope. Even more insane. The premise of the movie is this. These gangsters, they get out of jail and they hit on this scheme where they're going to kidnap the Pope. So they kidnap the Pope. And one of the ways they're able to do it is one of the guys in their crew looks almost exactly like the Pope. So they switch him out with the real Pope. They kidnap the Pope and they're holding him for ransom. The ransom is they need $1 from every Roman Catholic on the planet Earth. And don't ask me how they would ever keep track of something like this. And this is the plan. They're going to hold the Pope for ransom. It is as insane as the premise sounds. But I watched it with my son, my older son, who's 20. And you come away with this thing, both of those movies, is this guy these movies are just trash, and he's a total hack. He can't act at all. But there's so much energy and ambition and drive. And you feel like this guy is going to do everything he can he has a vision. Maybe it sucks. He's almost like an Ed Wood in a way. He has a vision and you can't deny it. And you can't take your eyes off these movies. And in spite of how bad they are incredibly entertaining. And I stand by them. It's Massacre Mafia Style and Gone with the Pope. Seek them out. I'm telling you, you won't regret it. If you love exploitation movies, you won't regret it.
Wow, I'm going to have to check those out for sure. Oh, by the way, I want to backtrack just for a second. This is the truth. Spielberg directed Raiders of the Lost Ark, right?
Yes.
He stole a scene from Andy Sedaris in that movie, from the Seven film that I talked about before. And he readily admitted it. So that shows you the quality of the entertainment in the Sedaris, that he would pay tribute to Sedaris. It's a scene. If I tell you what it is, it will telegraph which scene it is. But I will just say for the listeners out there, there's an homage to Andy Sedaris in Raiders of the Lost Ark. I am not making this up.
No, I believe it. It's like I said with the Goodfellas thing. I think what happens is And maybe it's a little cynical, but I think in some cases these filmmakers, not like a Tarantino because he just outright copies things blatantly, but some of these filmmakers think to themselves like, well, no one's ever seen this movie. Nobody's going to notice or care if I copy this little detail. Like at the time that Scorsese was making Goodfellas in 1990, I don't think anybody had ever, even knew what Massacre Mafia style was because it never even had a home video release.
Yeah.
So if he saw that thing, I guarantee you he got ideas from it. Guaranteed. And just made it into a movie that was 1,000 times better, obviously. But that's what they do. I think they figure like no one's going to notice if I just snatch this or I snatch that.
Wow. There's so much exploitation. I'm going through my list. I didn't realize how massive it was, so I was just glancing at it. We talk a little bit more about you want to talk a little bit more about horror?
Sure. Yeah, please.
Have you ever heard of Herschel Gordon Lewis?
Yes. Talk about the Gore master.
The Godfather of Gore was his nickname. And let me tell you something. This was the original torture porn. I mean, in the 60s, no less. But the one thing I want to talk about, yes, they had the cheapest special effects. Everything was so phony, yet still revolting. Like when you'd see these murders of eyes getting ripped out and esophagus pulled out of a body, and usually women were being murdered, by the way, never a guy.
It's true.
And they were all sexist and they were all ridiculous and really the bottom of the barrel cheap. But the one thing I admired about him was their advertising campaigns. I just saw one of his trailers. You'd see writing on a screen like at a drive-in. It would say, "Ladies and gentlemen, if you have young and impressionable children, we suggest you go to the snack bar or simply turn your car on and go home. We're going to show scenes from the next feature called the Gore Girls, which will..." And then they would show this garroting for about 45 seconds. And if you have impressionable people or people with weak hearts, please do not view this. I love that kind of stuff. They did that a lot in the 60s. They would do it on TV too. You'd see writing on the screen like a scroll.
They would always make it seem worse than it was. Or what about the great trick, one of the best ever? As a wrestling fan, I appreciate this so much. But with Texas Chainsaw Massacre, where they go to great lengths at the beginning. They have this whole prologue narrated by an unknown at the time, John Larroquette, but where they tell you that this is all based on something that really happened in a very serious tone. Complete BS. It's a total work. But other than that, Leatherface is mildly inspired by what's his name? Gein. What's his name?
Ed Gein.
Ed Gein. But very, very... I mean, they make you think like this movie was taken directly from real cases. Not true at all.
No.
But it adds to the mystique and the aura of the movie.
Yeah. Well, anyway, most of the Herschel Gordon Lewis stuff is available on Tubi and those stations like that and Plex, and they are revolting. And they're so fake. That's the funny thing about it. You see mannequin heads spinning around. It's just... But the color was spectacularly lurid. I don't know how to put it. Like the blood is like super, super red. Whatever prints, I think they spared no expense on the prints of these films. And
I think Blood Feast was the first one, right?
That was the first drive-in one to take off. That's right.
And that's the one, that movie I think is really like the first, at least American movie that really depicts like real gore and blood. I mean, it's even years before Night of the Living Dead.
1963 that was.
That's early. That's the year The Birds came out. I mean, think about that. I mean, you're still sort of in the last vestiges of classic Hollywood at the time. Vincent, they're making those, I don't know, would you consider these they're not really, they're B movies, but they're not exploitation movies. You know what I love? The Roger Corman, Edgar Allan Poe movies. Oh my God.
Yeah, you know what? They're too...
They're not exploitation.
No, they're too well distributed and too budgeted to be exploitation films. That was the line I'm looking at. Like most of the stuff I'm talking about here, nobody's ever heard of, and it had weird distribution, and like I said, since I was from a little town originally, we get a lot of this stuff at the drive-ins because they could show a triple feature. 3 horror films, or whatever it would be. I remember seeing Invasion of the Bee Girls and stuff like that, and a triple... There's one for you, William Smith again. Okay, William Smith is a big, brawny actor. It's 1,000 exploitation.
I probably would know him if I saw him.
He was known as Big Bill Smith, and he was a lot of the biker films, which is another exploitation genre. from the
Here,
late
here's
60s.
one I saw recently from this era. Tell me if you've ever seen this. Children shouldn't play with dead things.
I just look at the I look, where is it?
What a bizarre movie. And again, it's not a good movie, but who cares?
There it is in my notes. The last thing I wrote down was children shouldn't play. I saw it on Channel 9 around 76.
I'm amazed they would show something like that on a Channel 9. That's
It was
pretty
late. It was down after wrestling on a Saturday night.
okay. There you go.
Now on the $1 Million Movie, children shouldn't play with dead things, and they
$1
didn't.
million movie.
And you know
Right.
what? It was a very cheap film, but wasn't it effective?
Yes, it was. Sometimes with these kind of movies, the cheapness actually makes it more effective. There's
Yeah.
just something, it adds to the grittiness of it, the believability. Like it doesn't seem overly polished. It makes it seem somehow even worse, you know.
And I think there was 7 youths or 5 kids, like around 20-ish people, and they're in a boat and they go to an island, and all of a sudden they discover they're not alone on the island, and they're
Yeah.
attacked by these zombie-ish creatures, and there's friction amongst these kids, and they were actors, and they're trying to be acting. I think one of them wanted to be an actress or something, and then they all got off by the end, really. And there's one of them who was a real jerky guy and an ascot. Do you remember the real
Yes.
fey guy? He was like, "I am going to be your director," and he was the last one to get it. And he was a coward. He shoved one of the girls right into the zombie instead of getting it himself. There's a lot of really good. It worked. It worked as you get mad at the director, and
Yeah.
it was effective in a way like I've never seen. And you know what? Everybody that saw it, we were all talking about it. Did you see Children Should Play with Dead Things? Yeah, that was really good. And the ending was awesome. Remember the zombies take over their boat and they start floating back toward the city slowly?
Yes.
And
Yes,
then
which was copied in Lucio Fulci's Zombie 2, because that movie ends with
yeah.
the zombies come into New York Harbor at the beginning, and then they're walking over the Brooklyn Bridge at the end of the movie.
Dude, I can't believe you brought up Children Shouldn't Play with Dead Things. Did you
Yes.
see it? Did you see it in the cinema or on television?
I rented it. I think it might have been a Netflix jam.
Channel 9 would show some weird ass exploitation movies. You ever hear of a movie around 72 called The Baby?
No.
With Anjanette Coleman and Ruth Roman raising a full-grown young man who is still in a diaper and still in a crib acting like a baby.
Oh, I've seen like clips
Yeah.
of this. Yes.
It
What
is
about
one of the sickest little movies that Channel 9 ever showed.
I think I saw the trailer to this. Yeah.
Yeah, it's weird.
Here's one for you, Bob. Basket Case. How about
Basket Case. That was
you
one
know
of my
Basket Case?
Basket Case is one of my brother's favorites. Yeah, I remember that. He talked about that one all the time.
It is insane about like, isn't it like a vestigial twin or something that
Yeah.
somehow survives, and it's just like a head and an arm?
Yeah, right. Just this little disgusting thing, but it was the brother, right?
Yeah, it was his
Twin brother,
brother, so
yeah,
he was
yeah.
taking care of him
Right.
because it was his brother. You know what I used to, because you're talking about those I would be, sitting in front of the TV on a Sunday afternoon, Channel 9 or whatever, and seeing things I shouldn't even really be seeing at the age that I was,
Yeah.
And then one, maybe you could help me with this, because I can't. Google doesn't help me. Nothing helps me. I thought it was a Hammer movie. I can't think of what the hell. All I remember what it was about, because it really freaked me out, especially because I was raised Catholic. And, when you're raised Catholic, certain movies like, let's say, The Exorcist, right? It takes on a whole other meaning for you, especially when you're a kid, because it's like, oh my God, there's like an element of like, could this really happen kind of thing to it, So this movie, it's a vampire movie, but it's about a priest. The priest shows up. It's got to be from the 70s or maybe late 60s. The priest shows up at this castle that is run by what he doesn't realize are like a cult of female vampires. It's almost like that scene in Monty Python and the Holy Grail where Galahad shows up at the castle, and there's all these like super sexy, female vampires, and there's this priest, and he's like straight and narrow, priest avoiding the temptations of the devil, and he winds up just getting gradually, slowly seduced by this coven of female vampires. And so it ends on this really bleak note where I think they like turn him into like their vampire slave or something. And I'm 8 years old on a Sunday afternoon with this, Woody Woodpecker just ended. And this thing comes on, and I'm like, oh my God, what is this? And I have no idea what this movie is called. I've never been able to find it again.
I don't, it sounds vaguely familiar. And
Maybe if someone hears this, they'll be able to reach
if
out.
anybody knows, let us know, because I think I may have either seen this, but I do know about it, and it's 70s stuff, right?
It felt like, thinking back to it now, I wouldn't have been able to tell you then.
Maybe early 80s, yeah.
No, I think it had to be either late 60s or early 70s.
Okay.
This was like,
All right.
it had that kind of vibe to it. And, it was so, I don't know, it just really got to me, especially like the bleak ending of the movie and everything, and how, the good guy doesn't win. And, it was just a shocking thing to me to see at the time. And it's not, you think about it now and you look back, I'm sure you find this happens a lot too, as you go back to these movies, and in your mind, it was the worst, bloodiest, most violent thing ever, maybe because you were a kid. And then you watch it and sometimes you go, oh, it wasn't really that bad at all. There's really not a lot in there. For some reason, maybe when you're 9, it seems a lot worse than it really was.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Hammer's like that. I love Hammer movies.
I talked about that. Those are some of my favorites from being a kid, and they used to show those at our Saturday matinees too, and I loved them. I thought they were great. They were really well made, good acting.
Yeah,
the great pacing, good look, Technicolor, you name it. They had
good production values. There's
Yeah,
a guy. They had a director named Jimmy Sangster who was like their house director. And he did so many of those. He did like Horror of Dracula. He did Curse of Frankenstein and those. He's got to be the most underrated, egregiously uncelebrated horror movie director. His name is Jimmy Sangster, and he's responsible for so many of the classic Hammer movies. Peter Cushing, Vincent Price.
Christopher Lee. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Oh, actually, no, Vincent Price wasn't in those. Christopher Lee. Yeah, I'm thinking of that. So here's a funny story, how much I love Peter Cushing and Vincent Price. My son's name, I'm going to try to explain this as best as I can. His name is Peter Vincent, first name, middle name. Now, he's named after people in my family that were named Peter and Vincent. However, it didn't hurt that it was also the combination of Peter Cushing and Vincent Price, which is also where the name of the character in Fright Night comes from. If you know that movie, where Roddy McDowall plays a horror host who's like a phony vampire hunter who gets pulled into a real vampire case. And his name in that movie is Peter Vincent because of Peter Cushing and Vincent Price.
There you go. All right. Let's get back into sexy stuff. And you notice,
sure.
and you notice, I'm doing this. These were these R-rated films that were never. They were not pornography, not even close. There'd be some nudity, some topless scenes and stuff like that. But there was this genre that was real big from about 1969 to about 75. Women in chains. Women
in prison movie.
Women in prison, like The Big Bird Cage, Women in Chains, Caged Heat, The Big Bust Out, Terminal Island. But my favorite was this slimy little pot boiler. And I don't know who financed this thing, called Sweet Sugar. You can see it on Plex now. And it showed Phyllis Davis, who used to be on the show Vegas. Remember Vegas?
I remember, yeah.
She gets pinched.
Robert Urich, right?
She plays a hooker, Sugar Bowman, who gets pinched in a setup marijuana bust, right? So the judge says you can go cut cane for 2 years, and maybe we'll show lenience to you. And in an undisclosed Central American location. So by truck, they're all shoved into Central America with about 80 other comely-looking young ladies, and they're abused on the plantation, and they have to get off and it all ends with a giant fight between them and the people who are running the plantation. Violence, bad language, awful comedy. Why do I love this movie? There's nothing to recommend about this film, but there's something about it. It had hilariously bad dialogue. The acting was actually okay. They had a couple of guys who were real actors. Cliff Gorman and Ella Edwards were real actors who I'd seen in real things.
Right.
But Timothy Brown was another guy who did a lot of like co-starring roles. But this was a sleazy little, violent, little sexist, little.
Yes.
It was mainly just to show off how pretty the girls were in shorts and tank tops and explosions.
I
That was
think
basically the film.
I think what happened around this time, and maybe you could back me up on this, because I mean, you lived through it. You're a little older than me, but
Yeah, I'm older than most people. Yes.
what happened though is there was a point that was reached by the end of the 60s where the Hays Code was gone, the motion picture, the self-censorship of Hollywood was over with, and they had come out with the rating system where I think everybody lost their minds, and there was this feeling
Yeah.
of we could do whatever we want. And they just went into all these crazy places. And it's almost like in later years they kind of reined it in a little and said, okay, that's enough. But there were some years where they just went nuts because they could never do anything. And you'd see, I mean, what about nunsploitation? Are you familiar with that category of
absolutely.
exploitation,
Yeah,
right?
sure.
Where it's like the sexualization of nuns. I have a friend of mine who is fascinated with
Those.
nunsploitation movies. Can't get enough of it. Nuns doing things that nuns are not supposed to do. And I don't know if some of that comes from, Catholic school fantasies or something, but it's a whole thing. Or there were Nazi movies like that, like Ilsa.
She-Wolf of the SS. Yes.
Yes, where it's just
There was
like a weird.
I believe there were 3 Ilsa films.
Yeah, it's like a combination of like S&M and Nazis and, just combinations you would never even dare to think of putting in a movie now,
Yeah. They were pretty rough, those movies. Those
Oh God.
for what they did in those films, they were rough. And I don't mean sexually, they were violent
Yes.
and sadistic and just plain strange.
Yeah, well, like even the prison ones that you mentioned too were like that too. Caged Heat. That was the one.
Yeah.
I remember seeing some of these at the video store. You'd look at you go like, I know I can't rent this movie, whatever this is,
Right.
things like that. Yeah.
But there was sexy stuff that was meant to be funny and wacky and I don't know how to fluffy, but they still were like sex films, like the Pom Pom Girls, the cheerleaders, cheering section, the teacher. All these movies that were mainly meant to show girls hopping up and down in bikinis was basically why people bought tickets and went to the drive-in. So
Yes.
but they were popular. I mean, what is it? American International Films, I think,
That was a big one.
made tons of these things, and they would always be in triple features at your local drive-in. At least they were when I was growing up. And my ex-wife and I used to go to these movies all the time because that's what they were showing. So
Yeah.
we would go and sit through 3 of these terrible movies.
3 is a lot. I can see
you're,
2.
you're driving home at 1:30 in the morning, after seeing 3 90-minute Millers about I lost my charm bracelet. I can't even put them into words. There were just these fluffy little, sex, sort of sex movies, and most of them there was one of the women was really beautiful, and one of the guys in the neighborhood wanted to hook up, and that was basically your inner theme to these things.
Right.
And she hates him, and they're not getting along. But by the end of the movie, they're having sex, and that's really why we all came to the cinemas to see them make out. So.
Pretty much, yeah.
That was a big deal. The Bikini Babe cheerleader type films there's one that was just called The Cheerleaders, which, by the way, I believe ended up in 71 or something like that, one of the top 30 grossing films in America that year.
Well, that's the thing. Like these movies were very attractive sometimes to studios because they had the potential to have a huge profit upside. I mean, no joke. If you stumbled upon one that became a massive hit for whatever reason out of nowhere, you're talking about a movie that maybe you spent under $1 million on, and you're making tens of millions of dollars from this movie.
Right.
I mean, that could happen. It happened. With some
a lot.
of these movies. It would definitely happen.
And, especially in horror and those type of things. And then, which brings us to Russ Meyer.
I was going to say Russ Meyer.
Yeah, I mean, Faster Pussycat, Kill Kill, Beyond the Valley of the Dolls, The Super Vixens, Beyond the Valley of the Super Vixens, which I saw. Awful. I mean, it was all formulaic. Every woman every woman in these films was pneumatic. We'll put it that way. They had bus lines that were
Tora Satana. Come on.
Yes, all of those women, and simulated. These movies had simulated sex, but they weren't porno. They were just
No.
basically
I
that's why you went, and they had weird pacing and strange dialogue, and that was Russ Meyer.
I met Tora Satana
You
at a
met her.
convention. I met her at a
Okay.
convention. Chiller Theater in Parsippany, New Jersey. I don't
Sure.
know how
Yeah.
that's one of the oldest. That goes back to the 70s, one of the oldest, genre movie conventions and things. And I was at one of them about 25 years ago, and she was there. I'll never forget it. It was like, to me, it was like I'm in the presence of greatness. Like it was like meeting Betty Page or something, or like, what's the oh man, I'm trying to think now. There was a famous some burlesque star. I can't think of who I'm trying to think of. But anyway, it was it was like a big deal to me. Oh my God, it's Tora Satana. And she's ancient and just not trying to maintain whatever semblance of what she had, but it's still Tora Satana.
Yeah, you know something? If you were really into somebody as a youth and you meet them as a senior citizen, you still see them as the person they were.
Oh God, I had
Right?
an
Right? That's how I
yes,
feel about
absolutely. This bleeds into wrestling, and I apologize for it. But
it.
at Cauliflower Alley a couple of years ago, they had some of the Glow Girls, and they came out, and one of them was Colonel Nanuchka. Okay, do you remember Colonel Nanuchka?
Oh, yeah, the blonde,
Yeah, she was supposed to be a Soviet KGB agent. She was actually the inspiration for, if you see the Glow Netflix series, the main character is basically based on Colonel Nanuchka. But so she's one of them. I had the biggest crush on her when I was like 12,
Really?
13 years
Of
old.
all the
Oh,
of all
of
the
all of them. Yes. Forbidden Fruit. She was the KGB agent. She was like, and so I'm at their table and I'm going, can I please take a picture with you? And I'm saying to myself, I said, not to myself, I said it to them. I said, if the 12-year-old version of me could see this right now, I think he would faint. And she goes to me, I can't tell you how many times men have said that to me, but it's true. It's like I'm standing there and I'm going, it's Colonel Nanuchka. I can't believe it.
There you go.
I'm still thinking like it's 1987,
You know what amazes me? The one I had a crush on was Tina Ferrari because I thought she was an amazing athlete.
who I got to know very, very well.
Really?
She was
Yes, she did.
Ivory,
And
WWE.
then I see her at the WWF Hall of Fame ceremony going, "I never got married." And I what? Right?
Right.
How is that
I
even
know.
possible?
I know. One thing I know about her from knowing her, because she was Ivory in WWE,
Right.
is I know, and I don't know if this explains it or whatever. From what I remember of her, she was very, very ambitious and very driven to be a success in some form of the business or another. She was the only Glow Girl that ever made the
That's exactly
transition
right.
to
That's
something
exactly
like WWE.
Mhm.
And I think it really was, she was very, very single-minded, and she really had no interest in having serious relationships or having kids or family or anything. It just wasn't what she was going for. She was all about her career. And,
Right.
that's, sometimes you have to make a choice, I think.
Yeah, she was my help. I kind of about becoming, and she did. She was the only, and I'll have you know this. This is the truth. I can remember this story back when I was with PWI. Ken Resnick called me. I don't know why I'm talking to Ken Resnick, but they were just starting the LPWA, the thing that Cornette was involved with, and Joe Pedicino and those guys, and he was on
That
that show
had
too.
Terry Power was the
Right,
champion.
Terry Power is the champion, but he goes, "You ever hear of this Tina Ferrari?" I said, "Hire her." I did. He said, "Why?" I said, "She's the only athlete that was on Glow." He said he had a bunch of the Glow people that were. I said, "The only one I would consider is her," and he hired her. They hired her, so she was on that LPWA show too, which was a step between there and the WWE that she eventually ended up on. So
Yeah, and actually Terry Power as well,
yep,
who was not a Glow Girl, but she wound up becoming Tori, the original
right,
Tori
original
in
story, yeah,
WWE.
yeah.
Yeah.
So we have
Who
said
fell off the face of the earth, by the way. I don't
she
know.
really did, didn't she?
What the
Yeah,
heck happened to her? Yeah.
yeah. It was strange because they pushed her.
Yeah.
Oh my god, did you remember the match between Ivory and Tori that was kinda like
Yes.
they were in a hallway?
Yes.
One of them burns the other one with the iron or something? Oh my god.
Well, they had her as Kane's girlfriend for a while. Do you remember that?
No,
Tori
that I
became,
don't remember. No.
yeah, she was Kane. She was going to try to like fix Kane, like humanize Kane, and she became his girlfriend. Yeah. Yeah.
That one's over my head, but,
Yep. You have to. I have to bring wrestling into it, no matter
That's
what.
okay. Not a problem.
Tori got me into, this is the craziest thing ever, but she got me very, very briefly into Bikram yoga, of all things, when I was first starting to work at WWE, because she was into it, and which is like hot yoga. It's like the yoga they do, and she lent me a book on it, and I was actually learning about it for like a hot second before I started realizing like, what the hell am I doing and stuff.
Well, I'll tell you what. All you had to do is look at them. They're in amazing physical condition. Why would you not want to be like them? I mean,
That's
come
true.
on now. Here's a genre of exploitation movies that probably had a higher percentage of really good movies amongst their numbers. Blaxploitation films.
Yeah, very maligned unfairly. You're right about that.
You had Shaft, Foxy Brown, Blackula, which is legendary for its ridiculous premise, Black Caesar, Superfly, the amazing Dolomite series where there'd be a knife fight going on that broke into a dance routine. You can't even describe the Dolomite series.
Did you mention Blackenstein?
Blackenstein. No, I didn't mention that.
Yeah, there was Blackenstein.
That's right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Hell Up in Harlem. And, some of these had budgets, some of them didn't. But I think there were a higher percentage of quality film amongst that bunch I just read. And Pam Grier made a whole career out of these things.
Oh, yeah.
And they were actually really
Foxy
good
Brown.
movies. And you know what? They played them in my hometown all the time, these films.
Yeah, and it was an interesting time because, again, it was like a reaction to what had come before. You had, first of all, if you grew up at a certain time in America, if all you did was learned about the world from movies and television, you would think that black people didn't exist at a certain point in time. And then in the 70s, that really started to change on movies and television with the idea of more representation. But the thing that made blaxploitation interesting was, before that, first of all, there were hardly black people in movies, but when they were in movies, and this is nothing against great actors like Sidney Poitier is the classic example, they would have to be unthreatening, very safe, they could never have an edge to them or be threatening at all to a white viewership. It was like the Guess Who's Coming to Dinner phenomenon, where it's like you could literally bring this young man home to your parents kind of thing. And but they didn't care about that if it was white actors in movies. You could be as out there as you wanted. So blaxploitation was like the chance to say, we're going to empower ourselves in these movies and have these badass characters and not care if they're threatening to white people. In fact, the white guy's going to be the bad guy in the movie.
That's exactly right.
You're going to root against.
Yeah.
It was revolutionary. Yeah.
They were up against the man is a lot of the
right.
plot themes in these.
The reason I say that is because it's easy to look back now in a very snarky way and look at some of these movies and laugh and think they're cheesy and corny and stereotyped and ridiculous. But you have to understand the milieu that they came out of, that what it was a reaction to. This was like black characters, black actors, black people taking back their power, and like saying, we're not going to be Sidney Poitier. We're not going to be Harry Belafonte. We're going to make you scared. We're going to be badasses. We're going to be the good guy without having to, defer to a white character who's the good guy. Like it was just a very new thing. Maybe it went to an extreme or whatever, but it was because it was a reaction to something from that was before.
And you know what? You know what else was big in my hometown in the late 60s, early 70s? Biker films.
Oh, well, Easy Rider, right? Was like the first one of those.
Yeah, but I'm talking films that had, exploitations type distribution, names I can't even remember. But there was always a biker movie playing.
Wasn't there one with Joe Namath?
Yeah, that's right.
There was one where it was like Joe Namath's rush with movie stardom or whatever. That never really happened. I remember one of those.
All I can remember is She Devils on Wheels was the name of one of them, and I think that was Herschel Gordon Lewis too, if I'm not mistaken. There was also
and hippie movies, right? Hippie movies were sort of like kind of related.
Oh yeah, and for some reason my small town booked those things constantly. I can't even figure out why, but they must have been popular.
You know what's weird about those kind of movies, the hippie movies? And even just hippies in culture at the time, we think about it now because we live in a world where that generation really came to eventually run the world. I mean, the baby boomer generation, everything really became the tastemakers and the power brokers of the world. So there's sort of a nostalgia for the 60s and for the hippie movement and stuff. But at the time, it was not really like that. I mean, especially the older generations, they feared the hippies. They hated the hippies.
Right.
They were threatened by the hippies. And then on top of that, you had the whole Charles Manson thing, which seemed to almost validate all of that and say, like, you see, look, they're out of control.
Mhm.
So in a lot of those movies, the hippies are dangerous. They're not.
Yeah, that's what they were constantly.
They're menacing. They're
Yeah.
they're going to destroy society. They're not, kind of like the sort of benevolent hippies that we think of today.
You're opening my mind. My mother and my sister, my older sister, is like, "You're not going to see those biker films." I remember this. Now I'm like 6 at the time, but I remember she wanted to go see some, roaring bike movie. "You're not going to see those dirty movies," so she didn't go. I remember this.
Yeah, because it was glorifying this
Glorifying
lifestyle, right?
the hedonistic biker lifestyle, yeah.
Did you ever hear of a movie? This is a very bizarre counterculture hippie movie, but it's called An American Hippie in Israel.
That would escape me.
It's a real movie.
I believe it.
And I think it's actually where John Landis got the title for An American Werewolf in London. I think it was meant to be sort of like a joke on that. Despite there was also a movie called Werewolf of London, a Universal movie in the 30s, but it's called An American Hippie in Israel. And it's about a guy who it's another one of those I can't really do it justice because it's so psychedelic. He's a Vietnam vet. Okay, so he has these horrible experiences from Vietnam. But then, after the war, he becomes a member of the counterculture like a lot of guys did, I guess you could call him a hippie. And he somehow winds up in Israel, because they have the whole commune culture there and everything. But it's so much more than that. It's like very much about the counterculture movement, but from the perspective of what was happening at the time, where there's a lot of violence, there's a lot of drugs connected to it. It's a cultural artifact. Is the best way I could describe it. An American hippie in Israel. Yes, seek it out as well.
That I almost want to seek out because that sounds the kind of weird I like. How do they even come up with the concept and then you go from there?
Who thought of that? Right.
That's right. Exactly right. All right, I'm just gonna name a few exploitation. I'm gonna put it this way: these are films that did not have major distribution that I really liked. All right, now here's a bunch of movies, as I mentioned before. They weren't distributed by major film studios or anything like that, but these are all movies I really enjoyed, and a lot of them got popular based on the fact that it was just word of mouth, and most of them are from the 70s and 80s, except for one from 1963. You ever hear of Reform School Girls?
Yes.
That got so popular because it was like a parody of the women in Cage's films. And it was an actually funny spoof, a lot of action, a lot of babes, and it had a pleasingly silly and playful note to it. I remember seeing that at a drive-in with some friends, and we all had a good time. At Reform School Girls, it's not porno or anything. It's just silly and raunchy, and bust out of my cell block. One of those things. It was a good movie. I enjoyed that one.
Yeah, I never saw it, but I definitely knew of that. Again, that was another one. Like I've been saying, I spent a lot of time wandering around the corridors of many video stores unattended as a child and seeing things I should have never probably seen.
Now, I'm sure you've heard of Eating Raoul.
Yes. Oh, yes. Yeah.
I believe that was just an indie. I wouldn't call it exploitation, but it was an indie comedy with Mary Warnoff and that bunch. And that was a really good movie. And it started to make money, a critic's darling. And from the 1980s, it did very, very well for itself. A little movie that that one was.
Yeah. Another one I never saw, but I definitely knew of it for sure.
Okay. Well, I can't believe you haven't seen it. How about Shock Corridor from 1963? This was a really grisly gritty psychological thriller by Sam Fuller. A journalist enters an insane asylum to solve a murder and ends up going mad himself.
Wow, that
It
sounds like
it
a great
it
premise.
is a unbelievably filmed black and white film, riveting, and when it's over, you're disturbed by this movie.
Hmm.
It really works in that lurid late 1950s, early 60s, hard hitting. It's on video. It's a lot of critics are really into that film. Again, that's a little movie that stood the test of time, and I think it's pretty influential, that film. So if you've never seen Shot Corridor, that's a seriously gritty film. I really like that one.
No, that one I have not seen. I have one for you,
Okay.
and I don't know why I kind of put this in my mind with People Shouldn't Play with Dead Things. I mean, it's not the maybe because it came out around the same time, but Let's Scare Jessica to Death.
Oh yeah. Okay. All
Talk
right.
about hippies. Now that's one of those evil hippie kind of movies
Right.
because it's like where she gets like, I don't know, sucked into this weird hippie cult or something like that. But that came out right around that same time, like early 70s kind of era.
Mm-hmm. That's right. Shaft.
Yes.
I believe Shaft was independent and then got picked up later on when it started to get hot.
But that's an example. That movie became an international smash hit. And that
Mhm.
was a low budget exploitation movie of the type that was being cranked out every 5 minutes. But for whatever reason, that one just took
Mhm.
off and became an iconic phenomenon.
The hit record didn't hurt either. Isaac Hayes.
Well, yeah, they had, but
Yeah.
but you know what? A lot of those movies would score a great title song or a great or a somewhat known singer doing the title. You know, that would happen. It didn't guarantee a hit, but
Right.
but in that case, it helped. Actually, I think that won the Academy Award for best song from a motion picture for that year. Think
Mhm.
about that.
Oh,
From a black exploitation.
do you remember Isaac Hayes at the Oscars? White America shit its collective pants. Because here he comes up a set of stairs, the lights are behind him, and he's got chains on, right? And he was big and masculine at that point.
Yeah.
And white America went, "Whoa, what am I looking at?" And he went into that
yeah.
song. It was seminal. What a moment on the Oscars.
It was crazy too, because when you think about in that particular category, I mean, you're talking about that's a category that's as old as the Academy Awards. So this is an award that in the past would go to songs that were sung by, you know, Fred Astaire or Gene Kelly and things like that in classic American musicals and stuff. And now here you have Isaac Hayes, like you said. It really is like such a cultural turning point for
Absolutely.
America at
Yeah.
the time, you know.
And shirtless, I
Yes,
mention.
that's right.
Yes.
I'm a little too young to remember when it happened, but I have seen it. Of course, I've seen the performance.
Oh,
Isn't he's on like an elevated
yeah.
platform, right?
Ba-dum,
With the
ba-da-bum,
with the
and here-
piano.
and the lights are behind him, and he rises. Holy smokes!
Yes, yes. I
Oh,
think he
man.
has platform shoes on.
Oh,
It's crazy.
it's succinctly was kind of like a signal to Hollywood that times were changing right then.
Yes, they're very much so. Even that song winning that award was like such a shift from everything
Mhm.
that had come before. I think like just a couple of years before that, it was going to like the shadow of your smile. No, I mean like
No, that's right.
legitimately, which it
Yeah.
was a beautiful song, but it's just a
Yeah.
complete like,
Yeah, yeah. I have Texas Chainsaw Massacre in here because of its influence. It is one of the most influential films of all time. In terms of that was an indie,
yeah.
you know, as well as what's the cannibal one?
That
Shoot.
came out the month I was born, by the way.
Really?
December 1974.
Assault on Precinct 13. I have on my list. The Last House on the Left is a classic.
I was going to mention that one. Yes, yes.
And here's a couple comedies. Cracking Up, which nobody has ever seen, but it had members of Firesign Theater, The Credibility Gap, the Ace Trek and Company, all glued together in a comedy about a typhoon that ruins California, just wrecks it. Somehow they made a comedy out of this. Fee Waybill of the Tubes is in it. It's a strange little movie I saw at a drive-in. and there were so many laughs that I still remember it fondly. But my favorite indie, it's on this list because I know this was another little film that could around 1972. It's called The Groove Tube. If you've ever seen that, it was directed by Ken Shapiro, and it was definitely the precursor to SNL. Chevy Chase was in it.
Interesting.
A lot of, I think Christopher Guest wrote one of the sketches. It is really raunchy for its time. I'm not saying it's pornography, but there's one that's shocking scene about it's a venereal disease warning TV ad spoof, and you have to see it to believe it. That's all I'm going to say. The VD ad is like almost pushed it into like a different territory. We'll put it that way, but it's hilarious.
Great.
The movie has a lot of it's basically a spoof of early 70s TV, and I think when I was a young adult in my high school years, I probably saw it 6 or 7 times. They always had double feature. They always bringing these movies back. It would be that and Monty Python and the Holy Grail, or it would be that and Fletch Gordon, another exploitation comedy, right? Or that and some Neil Simon comedy stitched together. So it was. I loved the group too. It's one of my favorite. I actually own a DVD copy of that one.
That's great. Yeah, I'm not above that. Just picking up DVD copies of movies that are not exactly what we'd call cinema classics, but you just need to have it in the library.
Yeah, sure. Just for the memories of it sometimes. Sometimes it takes you back. That's why I will buy something in a hard copy, because it will take you back to a time in your life when you thought it was like I have the original Star Wars, which I still think was one of the best times I ever had in a movie theater. There's just something about Star Wars that was just so pleasing and so much fun. And a throwback yet modern at the same time. It's an indescribably great film.
And that's the thing that gets forgotten about. And again, I know it's not exploitation, but it has a lot to do with the 70s. You know, Star Wars has become such a cultural juggernaut and such a like omnipresent thing in our culture that's known and loved by multiple generations. And they keep cranking out more movies and more things, that what gets lost in the shuffle is what a 70s cultural moment that movie was. What of its time. Like you said, it was partly the nostalgia for the Flash Gordon, Buck Rogers stuff, which is totally forgotten, by the way, that was even ever an aspect of it. It was that kind of nostalgia for that stuff. But it also was such a flashpoint of the 70s. Like every variety show was doing like a Star Wars spoof. There was the Star Wars disco album that came out, which I have on vinyl and all that kind of stuff. And it was very much of the 70s. And that whole aspect of Star Wars has really been sort of like lost, because everybody just thinks of Star Wars, because it never seems to go away, as this very modern thing. But it was a very 70s thing at one time. You know, there's a lot of nostalgia with that first movie.
Mm-hmm. That I'll always have fond memories of that one. I got a couple more. I just want to, because weird 60s stuff.
Sure.
So weird that it has to be seen and enjoyed. In 1964, Del Tenney from Connecticut directed The Horror of Party Beach, where a monster that looks sort of like the creature from the Black Lagoon stalks a bunch of teenagers who in turn just keep rocking out to the worst rock and roll band you'll ever see, like this Beach Boys parody band, although it wasn't meant to be a parody. It is so awful, and it's so good. You ever see a movie so bad it's good? The Horror of Party Beach. The Horror of Party Beach is full of laughs, unintentional. There's even one semi-gory scene, but the rest of it is so ineptly made that it's the worst band ever featured in a film. Oh gosh. I mean, the lead singer looks kind of like Jerry Lewis. I mean, it's just
great.
Man. Now, in 1964, also, the incredibly strange creatures who stopped living and became mixed up zombies.
Yes. Yes.
Have you heard of that one?
Oh, yes. Oh, yeah.
I actually saw that in the theater. It's another rock and roll mixed with horror monsters. But the one that made such an impression on me from the 60s was Monsters Crash the Pajama Party was the name of the film. And here's how this worked, fans. I swear this is true. This sounds insane. The come on was the film when you saw the ad in the paper was monsters leave the screen and run straight at you in the theater. And that's exactly what happened. The film distributors gave costumes to the theaters. So the guy who sold you popcorn will be chasing you down the aisle in about 20 minutes because he runs from the side of the screen as the character. You would see the character like come toward the edge of the screen, and then he'd come out of a side entrance and start running around the theater. The kids would scream.
That's something that needs to be explored more. The idea, because this is stuff that's not done anymore, and if you weren't there at the time, if you watch those movies now, you don't get that part of the experience.
No.
But that was a whole thing where they would be like you guys were talking about the William Castle stuff, like with the skeleton floating and the electric shocks in the seats for Tingler.
The Tingler, yeah.
But that stuff went back to the earliest days of movies. And one of the things over the years I've seen are if you find the press kits for old movies, sometimes they're online, and the press kits include suggestions and ideas and things for publicity stunts that could be done. And some of them are insane, and you don't even know if anyone ever did them or not. Like I remember the Bela Lugosi movie White Zombie from the 30s, where he's like a Haitian. He's not Haitian, but in Haiti, he runs like a sugar plantation or something, and he enslaves all the Haitians and turns them into zombies when they die and all this stuff. And they suggested a publicity thing in the press kit where the local movie theater, you could hire people to dress up like zombies and walk through like the town square as zombies to promote the movie. And I look at that and I go like, God, I wonder how often stuff like this happen. Like they're recorded, are there records of any of this? And I want to read about the craziest live publicity stunts that were done for movies, because I'm sure in small town America, some of this crazy stuff was being done.
You bet there was. And you know what? Again, I think a lot of these movies were made for smaller towns, different markets, stuff that they could advertise with. They were, what else was great about the 60s and 70s? The ads in the newspapers for these movies would sell tickets.
Yes.
If you're squeamish, don't come. It was always that, or as a definitely not for children, even though the movie was like really mild and maybe we had one nude scene or something like that, but it was
they
like
give you a barf bag. There were movies where they give you a barf bag.
What movie was that? It's a famous one where they'd give you vomit bags. That's right.
Yeah, and again, it wasn't really one that was that bad, terribly, but they were given barf bags. And there's even, there's stories for some of the Universal movies. I think I remember reading this with Frankenstein, maybe. And again, it's not reported as being a publicity stunt, but I look back and I go, I think this probably was a publicity stunt, where there were stories about people passing out and having to be revived on the scene by like paramedics. And I think to myself, did this really happen, or were these people paid actors that were passing out in the movie theater? Because there would be some of these, maybe it was a William Castle thing. There were movies I remember reading about where they would say there are paramedics on standby at the movie theater for anybody that can't handle it or whatever. And that's clearly a publicity stunt. But so sometimes it would blur the line between, reality and what was ballyhoo for these movies.
And the way they advertise these things on television, like in the 60s, early 70s, into the 70s, almost into 1980, I remember they would have these ads. Again, it's a scroll on your screen. Community standards do not allow us to show in this film. I remember the name of the film, Eager Beavers. Due to its graphic content, this film has been rated R. Absolutely no children under 14 admitted. I actually go to the drive-in and see the movie. It was a detective movie with the words Eager Beavers slapped on the front of it, right? Had nothing to do with anything sexual whatsoever. And I said, that was a pretty good action movie, but where's the Eager Beavers? the title, and they would do this with these drive-in. They had these German sex comedies that just slap a dirty title on it, like, Raging Winches or something like that. And it wouldn't have anything to do with anything.
Right.
And drive-ins would show virtually anything if they thought they could attract a horny crowd, I guess.
Yeah, they were just trying to do whatever they could to sell as many tickets and
Mhm.
distribute with these movies that and make their money back. I mean, they were businessmen just desperate to try to make their money back any way that they could.
And again,
It's motivating these.
in rural areas like I grew up in, you know that the rental was cheaper than getting an A film. You know, it was cheaper for them to drive in to buy these movies than to buy the greatest hits of the day
Right.
or something like that. So if they could lure them in with a good ad in their local newspaper, I mean, triple features. Come on now. I mean, can you imagine? I sat through a bunch of triple features in my lifetime.
I have hosted double features in my time, and I felt like I can't believe I'm making people have to sit through all this.
Yeah.
I can't even imagine doing a triple feature.
No, it's amazing. But you know what? If you boil it all down, and I'm very nostalgic as I get older, the community theater in Catskill, New York, the 50-cent matinee, man. Me and my brother would go. My parents would give us $1. He'd give us, they'd give us $1.50. That 50 cents would feed both of us too. I remember getting a milkshake candy bar. That was the name of the candy bar. It was like a malted candy bar. And they had this soda machine where a cup would drop down, and for 15 cents, you could get a Coke. And I am telling you, we would go, our friends would go with us, you know, a whole bunch of us, 8, 10 of us would go. And those were the days, man. I'm telling you, I never recall having a bad time at the community theater. I don't want to wax nostalgic, but I am.
Why not? That's what the show's for.
That's what
isn't
the
it?
show's about. And I'm sure there's a lot of people like us. Did you go to Saturday matinees?
Yes, I did. Yeah. And there would be, I still remember when they would do like cartoon festivals and things like that,
Yeah.
where it would be just all cartoons all day, that kind of thing. I remember seeing those. I caught the tail end of some of those things.
But that's cool. At least you got the tail end of that.
I'm right on the
type of thing.
cusp, you know,
I'm so old that I
because
remember.
I'm really the home video revolution. Like that's really my childhood, is the explosion of home video.
Yeah, you know, it depends on what area you grew up into. That's right. Because
We had all those mom and pops before. Forget about Netflix. I mean, before like the blockbuster.
Oh yeah,
The little mom and pops were amazing.
When I lived in Saugerties, New York for a while, and I used to drive to the mom and pop video rental store. I was a regular.
My wife
there.
is from Saugerties.
Is she from Saugerties? Really?
Yeah.
Ulster County, groovy little town, is it? I always enjoyed
Love it.
Saugerties. I love it too.
Nice antique shops.
Yes, yeah, and not far from Woodstock itself.
Right, exactly.
But no, it's like we all have our things we did as kids, and the Saturday matinees were big for us, and nostalgia, you know, simpler days.
What's the cheapest movie ticket price you can remember for like a first run movie?
Oh, they would let us in for 50 cents.
50
Kids
cents.
were 50 cents, yeah. It went up. It went up eventually.
I always ask people that, like, what is the cheapest you remember movie ticket?
Well, if the family went, the 4 of us went, it would be, I think, $1 for the adults and 50 cents for the kids.
Because I don't know I was born in 1974, and I'm sure in the 70s movie tickets were very, very cheap, but my earliest memory of being aware of what a movie ticket cost was $5. I don't remember movie tickets I'm sure they were cheaper than that when I was little, but I was not aware of what they cost.
Well, you got to remember, I graduated high school in 1976.
That's great.
So
I wasn't even in kindergarten yet.
Brian, there are younger faces on the coins in my pocket. I'm telling you. I have some years on me, so
I don't even remember 1976. That's
yeah, but I will say I'm fortunate to be still kicking, still here, still remembering stuff. So, and I'm glad you like exploitation films as much as I do, because you know what, the creativity that goes behind some of these movies you won't get out of a major studio, and it's out of need, but you still have the desire to get your story told, and that can lead to great art sometimes.
That's what it is. Like what I was saying about when I was talking about the Duke Mitchell movies, it's just like the drive and the energy and the passion and just like the inventiveness of these kinds of movies. You just have to respect. You know, there's actually a lot of very creative people, motivated, ambitious people that were in this world making these kinds of movies, you know? I mean, there were some that weren't. There were plenty of hacks, no talent, people just trying to grab money, but there were actually some very creative, talented people as well.
Mm-hmm. And let's not forget Ed Wood. I mean, come on,
But he's the classic example, right? I
Yeah,
mean, you
yeah.
can laugh all you want that the guy really was not a talented director or whatever, but God, he believed in himself and he pushed himself and he made things happen. And you have to just respect the raw energy of it all.
But you know what? Plan 9 from Outer Space, it's a terrible movie, but there's parts of it that I thought were really well done, like Tor Johnson coming out of the grave with the lighting just right. I thought
Yes.
that looked really spooky.
Or
And
Glenn or Glenda.
but he would ruin these films with the most ridiculous dialogue, and they'd say things that didn't even make sense, and they were delivered by amateur actors who couldn't even pull those off, and it was like it got hard to watch. But the pie plate, flying saucers and stuff. I mean,
The gravestones that would just fall over in the
but
cemetery.
what I love about these movies is, and he did a handful of them, he got them made.
Yes.
He got
Yeah.
them made. People went and bought a ticket and saw these things. You gotta hand it for stick-to-itiveness. You really do.
Yeah. It's a small miracle when you know anything about the motion picture industry. Just getting a movie made and out is a miracle. Every time it happens, it's a miracle, especially if you don't have a big studio behind you.
I love Patton Oswalt's comedy bit about Deathbed, the bed that eats people.
That's a
Which
real
was a
movie.
real movie, yeah. And he was like, I can't get a script in anybody's hands, and they literally made Deathbed, the bed that eats people. I can't sum up exploitation movies any better than that, right? I mean that's brilliant, and he's right. I mean, how did they get that made?
Yeah. Yeah.
I did recently see a placard for that, and I'm going to have to see Deathbed, the bed that eats people. I have to see this film.
I think that was included. I used to take part in these multimedia clip shows with a friend of mine named Kevin Marr, who's a comedian and a comedy writer, brilliant guy. And he would do these shows where he would show clips from movies based around a theme. Each show had a different theme. And he'd show clips from movies and just sort of like riff on it and do like these video essays and things. And we did one on, I don't remember which one. It might have been the slasher one or just we did one on just bizarre movies, and we included that one. We included The Bed That Eats People. We included that movie. We talked about it. I definitely remember talking about that movie. Yeah.
I know I have to see that because I saw it. And for you folks listening out there, as a public service, a lot of the stuff we've talked about is available free on today's unbelievable array of streaming services. If you have a Roku or a Fire Stick, Tubi and Plex, and there's a whole mess of these like that.
That's right. And if you have something like Roku, you don't even need to necessarily know what platform it's on. All you got to do is do a search on the name, whatever you're looking for, and it will tell you. It will say, go to this, they have it here. They have it on Tubi. They have it on Midnight Pulp. They have it on Ray Gun.
When I was looking up the Andy Sedaris film, that's exactly how I researched where they could be seen, because I knew a lot of them were free at this point. And they're uncut, and they're as if you saw them for the first time on a VHS tape. So, yeah, I mean, it's a kind of a golden age for people like Esoterica, really.
It is. It is. It's so easy to find things now. It's weird in a way. It's like what I always talk about with YouTube. It's like we live in a time where, when I was a kid growing up, you couldn't find anything. And so whatever you got your hands on, you just like went crazy. You snatched onto it. Whereas now you could find everything so much more easily, but you just have to have the initiative to go and look for it. And it's there. It's not going to be right in your face. You're not going to turn on channel 5 and stuff's done. You have to take the initiative. I want to find this. And then it becomes very easy to find.
It does. And you hit the nail on the head with the Roku being the best source for just go to where it says search. And type it in. It will give you an array of channels. It's not just one.
Yeah.
So if it's available anywhere on, you may have to download one of the apps, but who cares?
Right.
You'll have it.
The app is free to download. I mean, any app is. Some of them might be subscription or whatever, but 99% of it is going to be free, especially with these kinds of movies that we're talking.
And I was thinking about the Herschel Gordon Lewis disgusting blood films, right? And which one of it that I ran into the other day on a channel on Roku I never heard of? Oh gosh, what was the name of that movie? Hold on.
The Wizard of Gore?
No, I've seen that. I saw one of it. No, it was called, believe it or not, The Gruesome Twosome, which is about this mad couple that's killing people so they can make human hair wigs. and it was on something called Classic Film Time. It was the name of the app. So I hit the button and watched 25 minutes of the gruesome twosome and watched a woman get decapitated while she's screaming, and the blood red is filling the screen. And I'm like, that's enough of that. But at least I found the gruesome twosome for free somewhere that if you're interested, you could all go and check it out.
Yes.
The Godfather of Gore, Herschel Gordon Lewis. Is it good? No. Is it historic? Yes. Because he was one of the real fathers of slasher movies, really.
Absolutely. And of gore in movies. Yeah. I mean, he was the originator of it. At a time when you couldn't do anything like that, he was pushing the envelope.
Lurid. I mean, that lurid with the capital L-U. I mean, it was just, wow, those movies are just so over the top, gleeful in their butchery. I mean, I've never seen anything quite like, and the faker the butchery is, the more yucky it is. I can't describe the way he did these things. Like you would, like I say, you'd see a mannequin head, or you'd see like obviously a plastic arm. But as they're ripping it asunder, you're still revolted by it. He had a real gift for that kind of thing.
There was a great line that Gilbert Gottfried, may he rest in peace, always used to use on his podcast, which was amazing, by the way. The Gilbert Gottfried Amazing Colossal Podcast. He would talk about movies a lot on there, and he loved a lot of these kinds of movies. And when he would compare the special effects, because you talk about today compared to back then, he would say the difference is this, that the stuff back then, it looked fake, but it felt real. Whereas the stuff you watch now, it looks real and it feels fake. And I think that is absolutely true.
But that's like Jim Cornette's comment about wrestling from his era, too.
Yes.
You know that quote, right?
Oh, yeah. That also perfectly sums everything up. How back then, they were, what was it? How they were doing their best, like, to be as safe as possible and not do anything to hurt anybody. And everyone believed it was real.
Right.
And today they're busting their asses and killing themselves, and everyone knows it's fake.
Yeah. That's the problem.
Yeah, it is. It is.
Hey, how's things going with PWI? I am so proud of you guys.
Thank you.
I don't want, if there are any wrestling fans listening, and I hope there's a few. PWI is as good now and maybe even a little better than it's ever been. And I say that out loud, and I've talked to Craig Peters and Bill Apter and other people, and they all agree. You guys are doing an amazing, amazing job. I don't want to call it the revival of the magazine, but you know what? It's never been better than it is now, and I want to let you know that, because
that really is all due to Kevin McElvaney. I mean, the new publisher. I say new. I think it's been like 4 or 5 years now, but the guy who took over for Stu. I mean, he really has put his stamp on the magazine and revitalized it. Is the best way to describe it.
Yeah.
It covers so much. It's a very different kind of magazine now. It's like, it's more than just a time capsule. That's the thing. Like the classic PWI, it was really a time capsule of its time. Like you could pick up that issue and really see like every little thing of what was happening in the WWF and WCW, NWA, whatever. Whereas the magazine now is more than that. It's hard to describe. It really shines lights on different areas of the business, internationally, independent stuff. It really gives you a much broader, I guess, view of the business than ever before. And there's still room for the outdated people, for the old school stuff, because they let me do my column, which is called The Way It Was. And it's all about the way it was. And the reason I even wanted to do it was I said to him, you are sitting on one of the greatest archives of wrestling photography on the planet Earth, bar none, maybe the greatest.
Oh, it's got to be. It has to be. Yeah.
We need to figure out ways to use these photos. And that's, my column is just an excuse to run those pictures. That's all it is.
Now, you did hit the nail on the head. I think as publishers, you're being very brave, because I've seen some wrestlers on recent covers that back in the era when I was working, they never would have made the cover.
Right.
Unless it was Hogan or Flair or the Von Erichs or Dusty. That era, they weren't getting on the cover, maybe in a snipe, but not as the main image. You guys are being brave and putting some people on the covers, recent covers that I've seen, that I said, wow, we never would have done that back in the day. Because I think who's on the cover of the current issue?
Well, there was the PWI 500 issue came out, which had Cody Rhodes on the cover, which is an exception, the top guy in the business, but that's because he won the PWI 500. But we recently had Roxanne Perez on the cover.
Exactly, right.
Who was at the time the NXT Women's Champion. We've had Matt Cardona on the cover by virtue of the fact that he's an independent guy who has been able to write his own meal ticket without having to kowtow to the major companies. And, he's the cover, Yeah, it's a different time, definitely, in the magazine. I think part of that is, honestly, part of it comes from, I think you can experiment more. I know this sounds crazy when there's less competition.
Yeah.
PWI no longer has to scream out amidst 10 other wrestling magazines and say, buy me, buy me. It's the only wrestling magazine on the shelf there, other than the only other big one is Inside the Ropes, and that comes from the UK. So
right.
Domestically, it's the only one.
Mm-hmm.
But I think you can take more chances in that case, because if people want to buy a wrestling magazine, they're going to go there and they're not going to say, oh, which one do I choose? No, it's the only friggin' one that's there.
Yeah.
So you can take more of a chance.
But,
it's freeing in a weird way.
And I think you guys are as astoundingly comprehensive of the entire world of wrestling right now, professional wrestling. And I got to give you credit. It cannot be easy to. I look at the ratings and the other articles and the news pieces, the columns, and I'm like, man, it's a lot of information in one book. So you guys are really kicking some serious butt. You really
Thank
are.
you.
You really
Thank
are. By any standard. And you know what? The printing, the square binding, beautiful color photos, guys, they're doing it. PWI is back. If you haven't picked up an issue, get one soon. And by all means, buy a hard copy, because you know what? It's nice. It's really nice. You'll be proud to have it on your stained coffee table. I'll put it that way.
Thank
you.
Bob.
Your TV coffee table.
Appreciate it.
Hey, tell the folks what you're up to, where they can find you, and anything else you need to hype.
Sure. Well, I've got my podcast, like we said, Shut Up and Wrestle with Brian R. Solomon. You can find it wherever you find your podcasts. Our website's suawpod.com. I also recently started up a Patreon that goes with it, which is kind of like an accessory thing, where it's called the Shut Up and Wrestle Commentaries, where I record commentaries, like a DVD commentary for classic wrestling cards that you could listen to while you watch the show. And it's me just spouting off about whatever show you're watching. And it's patreon.com/shutupandwrestle. That's a subscriber-based thing. But the podcast is totally free. My book, as I said, as Blood and Fire, the unbelievable real-life story of wrestling's original Sheik. I also have my superheroes book. Since this isn't a wrestling podcast, I can actually plug that one on the history of superheroes. It's called Superheroes, the History of a Pop Culture Phenomenon from Ant-Man to Zorro. And my newest one, which is in the works now, and I update people about it on social media, Irresistible Force, The Life and Times of Gorilla Monsoon. And if people want to follow me and just keep track of these projects, I'm on Twitter and Instagram at Brian R. Solomon. And on Facebook, it's Brian Solomon Writer. If you search for that, you'll find my author page on Facebook.
Very good. Very good. A couple things I want to go over with you before we go.
Sure.
I'm going to have a couple of your Arcadian Vanguard comrades from Stick to Wrestling, Steve Generelli and John McAdam. What we're going to talk about here? The difference in the way professional sports are covered on television now and then. And Steve, who is a fountain of the concepts, he likes these shows. I'm like, and then they went, yeah, okay, because they brought up a couple of ways that you would do things differently in the old days than they do now. And I think it's going to be an interesting show. That's coming up.
Oh, that is interesting.
Yeah. And I would like to invite you back. I would like to go back to talk about a little more animation if you'd like to come back.
Hell yeah.
Mainly because I am so hooked on MeTV Tunes.
Oh, I watch at least some of it on a daily basis.
It is what I do before I go to sleep every day.
I can see that totally.
Right before I go to sleep. If I want to calm my mind, I want to get away from the real world and the elections and all this stuff, I will put on Yosemite Sam. Yes. It works every time. It works like gangbusters.
Absolutely. And they just put the Super Friends on there now. They made my week.
I saw that.
They added it to the rotation. Yeah.
Oh, it's in the rotation now?
Yeah, well, yeah, it's on every day now at 4 o'clock.
The only thing I don't like I have to subscribe to Redly to get it, the Redly app. And it comes with a DVR.
I
right?
have the friendly app. That's
That's
how
it.
I.
Oh, I'm sorry. That's what I meant to say. I
Well,
have the friendly app. That's
I
right.
actually have a live TV antenna that I hooked up mainly for MeTV, the original MeTV, and I can actually get it as an over-the-air station,
Right.
MeTV tunes, but I mainly watch it on the Friendly app because the Friendly app has a lot of other cable channels on it because I'm
Yeah.
in the midst of getting rid of cable. But I'm not getting rid of cable the way that many young people do, where they just are just going to watch Netflix for the rest of their life. Like, I'm getting rid of cable, but I'm getting YouTube TV and Friendly, where I can still get all my favorite cable channels, but I'm paying like less than half the price. So
Yes, that's good.
that's what I'm doing. But I watch MeTV Tunes on the Friendly app typically.
Yeah, me too. The only thing I don't like about the friendly, I meant to say friendly. I said Redly. Redly is the magazine thing I subscribe. You ever hear
Ah,
of Redly?
no,
Readly?
never heard of it.
It's a magazine. It's magazines.
Okay.
It's a whole mess of magazines around the world, including Consumer Reports and Rolling Stone and all different kinds of things. It's a $12 a month subscription, and you read them digitally as they are printed.
Oh,
That's it. That's
great
all there is
idea.
to it. And you know what? As a guy who wants to continue to support print publishing, I figured, well, this is better than nothing. You know, so
Gotta survive somehow.
I know, man. I get the New York Daily News the same way. I read the PDF digital form of the Daily News every day as well, and the New York Times as well. So I'm still trying to support, little
Yeah.
ways.
Yeah.
But anyway, it's always a pleasure having you on here, man. It's you're one of the great creative people of current times, and I'm proud to have you here.
I'm glad to be here, Bob. Thanks for bringing me back again with my harebrained idea of another topic to talk about. Yeah, I appreciate it.
No sweat, man. And best is yet to come for this gentleman. And thanks again. Thanks for being here. I have a blast for these shows, I'll tell you. Before we wrap up, I want to take a look back at a couple of things we have covered on previous editions of the Outdated Entertainment Hour that you might be interested in. First of all, my friend Pete Mancini, the Americana singer-songwriter, has a new single out and a new album to follow in a variety of formats. You're going to want to check those out. And on top of this, he currently has been crisscrossing the United States, opening for the legendary singer-songwriter Jimmy Webb. I mean, what a treat that must be for Pete to open for such a legend like that. So, if they come to your town, look it up. If Jimmy Webb is there, chances are Pete Mancini may be opening for him. So, to find out more about Pete Mancini and his music, which is one of a kind, go to PeteMancini.com. Secondly, Burton Cummings has a new album out. You can check that out at BurtonCummings.com. It's already in the streaming format with CDs and albums to follow. You may or may not have heard, since we did that great Guess Who show with Mark Doble when we were first getting started with this program, that the Guess Who they sat down and hashed it out, and there was no more, and I put this in quotes, fake Guess Who anymore. It's all over. Burton Cummings and Randy Bachman pretty much own the trademark, according to published reports. There's really no news that they are going to tour as the Guess Who. Right now, Burton Cummings is on an extensive solo tour that will take him into 2025. And in addition, Randy Bachman is just finishing up a great tour with BTO. I saw one of their shows. It was great. By the way, there's randybachman.com too if you want more news on him. Anyway, the real Guess Who is back. Art wins in my eyes. And the legacy of the original band hopefully will continue on for as long as these gentlemen can perpetuate it. They're doing some real good work now. I heard a few of Burton's new songs, and they really weren't bad. They were really nice. So, again, an album to follow, but it is available for streaming. You can say, hey, Alexa, play, and you'll hear it. So you'll be surprised to hear after all these years, you first heard his voice on the radio around 1968 or 69. It's 2024, and there's a new album by Burton Cummings. Isn't that great? I thought it was really cool. Outdated Entertainment Hour at buzzsprout.com. That's where you can hear all of our shows at the click of a button. No Patreon, just listen. They're all free of charge. I hope you know our sister podcast to the Outdated Wrestling Hour. We look back and fond list at old school pro wrestling. Both are productions of Bob Smith Podcasts. If you want to write to us, it's outdatedent, that's outdatedent at Gmail. Write to us with complaints, queries, comments. You have any more exploitation films you think we missed? Let us know, and I'll see if I can read them on the air for you. We have some more guests lined up, trying to get everything working here. We're going to have some really cool shows. Steve Gennarelli and John McAdam are coming back to the show. I'm looking forward to that. They're from the Arcadian Vanguard Network, the podcasters professionally on their own right. And I think we're going to have a little fun with them. We're going to be talking about sports on television. Tell you what, these are heady times. I think you'd agree with that. Election around the corner. All kinds of things happening in America. But when I sit down with my little old mic here and I start to talk to some really groovy people, I'll tell you what, I feel like I'm 25 again. I haven't aged a bit. At least that's the way I feel. And I hope you get a little good sense of nostalgia out of this program as well. Maybe you can think back to some of them drive-in times you had. Maybe bringing a date to the drive-in, or going out with the family and packing a lunch or a dinner to bring there, some sandwiches and some sodas. Innocent times. Can't beat it, man. I am so nostalgic these days. I am just I'm reliving my kid days over and over lately, and it feels kind of good. I'm glad I have the memory I have, and I'm sure you got a lot of great memories too. Again, contact us at outdatedent at gmail.com if you'd like to trade memories. You can also find me on Facebook. I'm the only Bob Smith on Facebook that's singing with BB King on the lead page. You can see right at the top of my page there. So that's it for now. We really wholeheartedly thank you for joining us for this night of exploitation. And we hope you'll come back in a couple weeks and discover some more stuff here on the Outdated Entertainment Hour. Our name is Bob Smith. Thank you. Ringo Starr. Peace and love. Listen to those words. Let them sink into you, man. Peace and love. It's not too late. Peace and love.